Oh, it's so nice to go back to the regular intro.
I can tell you one time, don't want it with us. I can tell you one time that we'll fuck you up. I can tell you one time, go grab your guns. I'll tell you one time, this day belongs to us. Why?
Hello, and good evening, and welcome to the War Room. This is day 373, or if you're keeping track, it is 1 year and 8 days into this conflict. I think. Yeah, year 1, day 8. Of a war that nobody asked for. And I've started to notice a few things as this goes on, and I understand that this is a natural order of things. People get tired. It's the same conflict day in and day out in the news. Some people are busy, some people have other things to do, or their real lives get in the way, and then they sort of tune out or they lose interest. And for me, this show originally started off as a daily update because in the beginning, there were so many things happening that there were enough stories to tell you every day to make this only like a 30 to 45, sometimes an hour long show. And we would get through it quickly and then see you the next day. And you would get your updates from me as I took the time to conglomerate sources from all over the globe and putting them into one nice and digestible format. Anyway, as time went on and this war raged on, you would have uh, less and less stories because it was harder and harder for journalists to get to the front and to be able to report these things. Or the enemy would hide their evidence of atrocity so well that they weren't discovered until weeks or months later, and then it became sort of an afterthought or a revelation post facto. And so sometimes that news would come late. And then, honestly, Mother Nature got in the way. So here we are at the tail end of a bitter Eastern European winter, and people dig in when it's cold and miserable and uncomfortable. And so you have less conflicts, less skirmishes, you have a lot less troop movements. Generally, leadership tends to retreat back into their little bunkers where the heat is, and they planned for the spring offensives, things like that. In this case, they had planned for a 1 year anniversary offensive that sort of never really materialized to the effect that everyone was sort of estimating. So it was sort of a meh. But at that point, the stories were fewer and farther between, and we went from daily to weekly to bi weekly, and by that pattern, we shouldn't even be here tonight. However, last week was the 1 year anniversary episode of the war that nobody asked for. I'm not saying that it's not important, I'm just saying nobody asked for war. And it ran very long, 4 hours as a matter of fact. I left that episode completely exhausted. My voice was going, I could barely talk the day after, and we didn't even get to the experimental sociology experiment that I was hoping we could do in the form of a war game, estimated war game. The reason I bring this up is because I had groomed several panelists throughout the last 2, maybe 3 weeks in preparation for this war game. And it's sort of disappointing because almost all of them aren't here tonight. So maybe they're bored with it, or maybe this show has run its course because I can't keep the panelist retention. How am I going to keep the viewer retention? But for now, we're going to go on. I do have 2 panelists tonight. They are somewhat prepared for this war game. I was hoping we had 5 or 6 panelists tonight for it because it would be more entertaining to give you multiple perspectives from our multinational backgrounds. Now, I don't have any genealogical vested interest in this conflict. I don't have anybody in my direct family that's in this. So when I give you my scenario and country for this war game, it's just because I had to work off of the material that's in front of me. It's not because I can't tell you what South Korea is going to do because they're really not involved in this. Not really. So when we play the war game, I'll explain the rules. We'll go over it very briefly, and then we'll sort of just go around the room. We'll tell you what we think, and then we'll try to like voice out the possibilities. Now, I have somebody in the chat who I thought was going to be a panelist tonight for this. So, if you are going to play the war game, get your butt in the green room, and I'll drag you in. Then we'll do it. But for now, I've only got the 2. So, we do have a lot of stories tonight. I was surprised. Usually these things are fewer and farther between, but I guess as the weather starts to warm up and the political climate starts to warm up, the stories will start to warm up. So before I bring them in, I'll just give you a quick synopsis of the episode. We've got what I call salt in the wounds today. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of butt hurt going on geopolitically about people crying sour grapes or foul or yo, you can't do that, or why are y'all doing that, or if you do that or else, stuff like that, right? Sour grapes. We're going to talk about a concept known as backfilling. That's a basic concept of military hardware being moved to where it needs to be right meow. But then what do you do about the material that you have sent out? How do you replenish what you sent out for your stocks should the war come to you? So backfilling is going to be a theme a bit tonight. China is in the news because they have a giant amount of sour grapes that they're stepping on. Taiwan is starting to become an emerging second front issue, and we'll talk about that, about military hardware moves in terms of purchases and donations, and the implications and threats by mainland China because of it. So we'll get into that too. We'll get into the war game scenario, the what if war game scenario. We'll get into who is sending what, who isn't sending what, despite the fact that they may have promised you that they were sending things, and the reality of the fact that they can't send them. and why they can't send them. So, we'll get into all that tonight. We do have a lot of stories. We're going to try to get through them as quickly as possible. I'm just going to drag in both panelists today. I've got Mikhail Knightstrikesky, and I have Scott P79. So, good evening to you both. And now
Yep.
we are all here. Okay, so I sort of laid out I set the table, so we'll get through this relatively quickly because I do have a lot of short stories. There's a couple of long ones. We'll get into them, quick and dirty. We'll get into the war game, and then we'll get the hell out of everyone's hair because I got things to do, and so do y'all. Um, Before we get into this theme, um, Nightstrike put out a really good video yesterday, sort of at my request, sort of at his curiosity, and I thought because it had finished, we should probably touch on what it was because it has now officially ended. Um, for those of you who don't know, Mike is from a smaller-ish town in South Carolina, and
Just
became
outside of Charleston.
became ground zero for a very prominent case. Something that I've been saying in the chat every day has been the O.J. Simpson trial of this decade, at least until the Brian Kohberger trial starts. But for those of you who don't know, Richard Alexander Murdoch was found guilty of double homicide of his wife and his son, and he was sentenced today to life imprisonment to be served concurrently for the death of his wife and his son. Anyway, he got to give us a very unique perspective because it was, the town was ground zero, the county is ground zero, and the ability to accommodate a world of media in his area was breathtaking because they even took over what was that one building where they had all the lights and stuff set up? Was that like a botany thinger or
It's a wildlife center.
yeah. It,
It's supposed to be a learning center for kids.
so it's a wildlife learning center and they took it over and turned it into a makeshift studio and
Yeah, the Savannah news stations took it over.
truth be told, when I saw that, I busted out laughing. I was like, "Yep, put the animals in
Actually,
that cage."
you know how in that video I pointed to that U-Haul
Yeah,
while they had the back closed earlier, late yesterday. They had the back open,
yeah.
and they were recording, and it looked. I don't know if they were doing the weather or what, but they had a news anchor with with a microphone speaking into the camera
Fair
from the
enough.
back of a U-Haul.
By any means necessary.
I guess so.
Did they at least have the decency of setting up a green screen thing in it?
No, it didn't look like it.
Ghetto. It's okay.
So
All right. So, for those of you who don't know, Richard Alexander Murdoch, he was a
Murdoch.
he
There's no.
Murdoch. He was a prominent figure in the community. His family had served in the legal system for over 100 years. His grandfather was actually on the board of trustees, and his photo was in the courtroom. They had to take it down just so it wouldn't, mess with people.
Still
Uh,
did.
he was found guilty of murder twice, even though the murder weapon wasn't found. The guy was an avid hunter and outdoorsman. He had an entire house full of weapons. Just so happens that several of the weapons he owns were in the exact caliber or gauge that was used on his wife and kid. I mean, there's a lot.
Which anybody could have owned those calibers.
Correct.
Honestly.
But it was a 6-week ordeal. Um, and credit where it's due, attorney Creighton Waters was brilliant. Watching him lay out his case right up until the day that Murdoch took the stand. That guy, there's a reason why he's as good as he is. I read his bio. That guy doesn't lose, and now I see why. And I think justice was served here. I really do. I think there was enough forensic evidence, technologically speaking, with the phone and the car record and all that stuff. And the fact that the dude just kept lying. I mean, the one thing we didn't know about until today was there was something called a pre-trial alibi hearing before the public trial had begun. and it gave the defense an opportunity to set the table for what the alibi was going to be, so that can prepare the jury for it, so they can understand what's about to be presented to them. And during that, it was a closed door session, no cameras, no nothing. The jury was repeatedly told by the defendant, I was not there. I was not there. I was never there. No, I was taking a nap. I was at my mom's place, whatever. And then the son's phone had the video with his voice in it that 4 or 5 people immediately identified as him. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I was there. As soon as he said that, trial was over. Case was over. Busted. It's like, oh, so now you were there. And in 4 minutes after that video, your wife and your kid were dead, and you were recorded on your device taking 284 steps. What were you doing? I don't know. Wait, you were able to answer every single thing to the minute up until that question, and now you don't know? I don't know. Busted. His mugshot in his new permanent home was released today in his little yellow jumper that doesn't fit properly, and the fact that they shaved him like a plucked chicken. That dude still looks like a demon. But you know what? That demon's behind bars now. So, let's get that out of the way. That trial is over. For people like me who had a psychology and sociology and criminal pathology background, I found it fascinating. I tried not to dwell on it too long to make people vomit with just how interested I was in it, but from those perspectives, it's like, legal chess, and I find that fascinating because I'm not a legal person. I'm not a lawyer. I hit it from the forensic side, so like the brain, like how the brain works and how the person works. So for me that was fascinating. But it's over now. So now I have to wait very patiently until that demonic-looking Jake Gyllenhaal reject gets tried in Idaho for killing 4 kids in college, or whatever. That's coming. It's coming. We'll probably talk about that a little bit, but not now, because we're still talking about war on the other side of the pond. So let's go ahead and get started with that, so we can get things underway. I'm going to start from Friday's news last week, because I didn't present very many stories of that actual day last week. Because let's be honest, by the time we got to that Friday, 4 hours had passed, right? We were all beat. But a couple of the stories did come out in the evening of that day, and we're going to start from there. So it'll be the 24th of February, or day 366, year 1, day 1. And I have this photo here for you, because we're going to start off with what is not being delivered. The M1 Abrams tanks that President Biden promised to send to the Ukraine amidst its ongoing war with Russia may not arrive by the end of this year, or maybe not even the next year. This came from a U.S. Army official Thursday. Last month, Biden announced that the U.S. military would send 31 M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine to increase its defensive capabilities against Russia. However, the military does not currently have the available inventory to supply said tanks, and the Secretary of the Army, Christine Wormuth, said Thursday that transporting the vehicles to Ukraine is not going to be a matter of weeks. We're looking at what's the fastest way we can get tanks to the Ukrainians. It's not going to be a matter of weeks, she told reporters. She added, none of the options that we're exploring are weeks or 2 months. There are much longer timelines involved, but I think there are options that are less than 2 years. Less than a year and a half at least. That's not very confidence-inspiring, is it? On Friday, February 24th, the war between Russia and Ukraine reached its 1-year anniversary. The Biden administration on Friday did announce $2 billion in additional aid to Ukraine in the form of laser-guided rocket systems, drones, ammo, and more, including or along with new sanctions targeting Russia's economy, because we all know sanctions work. Wormuth said that the Army was still determining whether the tanks could be shipped by the end of the year. There's a lot of details that still need to be worked out, she says. On January 25th, President Biden, joined by Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary Antony Blinken, announced that they promised vehicles were the most capable tanks in the world, and they will enhance Ukraine's ability on the battlefield. They said that knowing full well at the time, when they told that to the public, that they didn't have them. Oops. This is about freedom. Freedom for Ukraine and freedom everywhere, he added at the time. The announcement came in tandem with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz saying that Berlin would send Leopard 2 main battle tanks to Ukraine ahead of an expected Russian offensive this spring. The next day, the Pentagon spokesperson Sabrina Singh revealed that the U.S. doesn't even have the M1 Abrams tanks in its stockpile to send. We just don't have these tanks available in excess in our U.S. stocks, which is why it's going to take some months to transfer those things to Ukraine, she says. Berlin initially denied Ukraine's request for tanks, but reached an agreement to send the military vehicles as Washington promised to do the same. Do you all notice what's happening here? We lied and tricked the Germans into going first. That's how this works. This is what they call diplomacy. Germany suggested unilaterally sending the tank could raise concerns over escalating the war. The U.S. had already supplied thousands of combat vehicles, instead of including 1,700 Humvees, and pledged to send another 500 armored vehicles of several types to the Ukraine earlier this month. I suspect some of them are the MRAPs I was promised but were left behind in Afghanistan. The U.S. also reached an agreement to send hundreds of upgraded M1A2 Abrams tanks to Poland by 2026. Poland is sending the first of 14 Leopard 2 tanks the government has promised to the Ukraine on Friday. See, Poland doesn't fuck around. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. Now. Like, right meow. We don't. We make promises we can't keep. Moving on. We'll go to this one. The Department of Defense has announced the $2 billion in defense spending for Ukraine. The financial aid comes in the form of a security assistance package that will build on a previous aid supplied in the war-torn Eastern European country. In their Friday statement, the Pentagon outlined the armaments being provided in the new package, including 155mm artillery ammunition, mine-clearing equipment, rocket munition systems, electronic warfare detection equipment, high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS, ammo, and more. Ukraine's latest gift from the U.S. was announced on the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion, a solemn occasion noted by Department of Defense officials. Today's solemn anniversary is an opportunity for all who believe in freedom, rules, and sovereignty to recommit ourselves to supporting Ukraine's brave defenders for the long haul, and to recall that the stakes of Russia's war stretch far beyond Ukraine. This came from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Austin boasted of the U.S. spending on support of Ukraine over the past year, reflecting on $32 billion worth of assistance that includes more than 1,600 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, more than 8,500 Javelin anti-armor systems, 232 howitzers, and more than 2 million rounds of artillery ammunition, 38 HIMARS systems and ammunition, a Patriot missile defense battery, 8 national advanced surface-to-air missile systems, and other key air defense capabilities, 109 infantry fighting vehicles, Bradleys, and 31 Abrams tanks, which we don't have, and 90 Stryker armored personnel carriers. Question mark on how many of those we have. Austin spoke positively of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and its member states' global contributions to the war effort. NATO is more united than ever, and the U.S. commitment to defend every inch of Allied territory remains ironclad. 1 year into a war of aggression waged by a permanent member of the UN Security Council, our allies and partners worldwide stand united and resolute, Austin wrote. He added Putin's reckless, illegal war is not just an all-out assault on Ukraine's sovereignty and a historic threat to European security. Now, I'm going to admit to something here. Russia is not actually a NATO member, right? They're just are they a full NATO member?
No.
No,
Okay.
they're not NATO. They're UN Security Council.
Okay. So, when we hear about Russia having veto power, that's for the UN then, right?
Correct. It's for the Security Council.
Okay. So they can't be, well, if you're going to be an agitator in an unjust war, how come the UN haven't expelled Russia from their boys club? Like on the record, like, you know what, you're out. Fuck off. How come that hasn't happened? As you know, it's like hey, 1939, Germany's part of the League of Nations, and all of a sudden they decide to take an extended holiday in Poland. And it's like, "Mm, what are you doing, bro? You're not supposed to. You're out. Fuck off. You know what I mean? Like that should have happened for Russia right
It
now.
wasn't Poland, it was France.
I think Poland was first. France came after. The Blitz happened
Uh,
after. They hit Poland first.
the Blitz was on England.
The Blitz was on everything west of Germany or west of Germany. They took everything.
Yeah,
Or they tried to take
they
everything.
they tried. They
They're
tried.
dicks. They were dicks.
That's why they're dead.
Now they're dealing solids. I got into an argument with Rick, whose lazy ass is still not on this show because, he can't be bothered. But
Yeah,
he was trying to
it's fine.
argue with me about the amount of contributions of other nations into the Ukrainian conflict. And he was like, "Did you know that the United States only contributed something like 20 billion or 30 billion dollars?" I was like, "Where the fuck are you getting your news?" And he was like, "Where are you getting yours?" So I sent him the source today, this morning, with a reminder that we're doing this show tonight and he should get off his dead ass and show up to it, right? And
Yeah, good luck.
I was like, my source, and I think this is credible. I think this is fair, right? My source for the total amounts of aid given to Ukraine was from the president or the offices of the president of Ukraine. Okay? So that means they are the recipients of the aid. And they're just telling you how much they have taken in per country. They have no reason to make up the number. You know what I mean? They're just like, this is how much everyone gave us. Thank you. Right? Why would they make that up? And it turns out that the United States has donated $200 billion since this began in
Alien.
terms of liquid cash and military assets. Like I'm assuming that's what it is. It's not just all liquid cash. Now, the number that Rick told me this week, if that was liquid cash, I could believe that. I'd be like, "Okay, that makes more sense." But tanks are expensive. Missiles are expensive, right? So $200 billion in a year, little over a year, that doesn't seem unreasonable. Especially when you consider that Germany, the country that basically runs the EU central bank, right? Uh, they've donated 179 billion. So they're 21 billion behind us. There's no, "Hey, y'all need to pay your fair share." There's no argument for that here. They're doing it. And they bailed out Greece and Spain. And they still had the money to do this. So, okay, good on you. And they're the ones who actually said, "Okay, we'll deliver Leopards," since the United States said that they'll send Abrams. What do you mean you don't have any Abrams? Shit, we already made the commitment. Now we got to send the damn things. See what I'm saying? Scheisse.
Scheisse.
Right. But all I'm saying is like, this is expensive, yes. But I think we talked about this last week, just for fun. I took the total amount that the United States donated in a year, and I reduced it backwards. I deflated it to the amount of money that it would have equaled in 1941. And it only comes out to 9.5 million. That's not much. In the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much. We're talking about, 200 billion is so much. It's 1941's equivalent of $9.5 million, which, okay, for the average working stiff, that's a lot of money. But when you think about what our national budget was with Biden in the last 2 years, those are in the trillions with a T. Like, okay, let's say it's $4 trillion in 2 years. I know it's more than that, but I'm just giving you a nice clean number, right? That's 4,000 billion. And we're belly aching over 200 billion? No. Sorry. That don't pass muster with me. If you want to take the entire amount of money that was spent for World War II, adjusted for inflation, for today's number, that's $4 trillion. The entire Second World War cost less than Joe Biden's budget. in 2.5 years as a president of the United States. You want to reduce that back to 1941? It's something like 196 million. Or maybe it's 296 million. I can't remember now. But it's really, I mean, considering what we spent so far, it's a drop in the bucket. Let's not kid ourselves. It's still a lot of money for you and me and most everybody watching this. But in terms of geopolitical clout and expenditure, drop in the bucket. Moving on. This one's called Blorp. And it's the same as the cover page today. Because I found this story kind of funny. One of the many Russian tanks that have been destroyed in the war in Ukraine has been put on display by activists outside of Russia's embassy in Berlin. The turret of the rusty T-72B1, which was taken out of service by an anti-tank mine near Kyiv on March 31st of 22, is now pointed in the direction of the diplomatic post. The broken tank signifies downfall. Ukraine is going to be Putin's Stalingrad. This came from Vailint Gaibel, an organizer of the demonstration, and was quoted as saying this. Gaibel told Reuters that the tank was brought to Germany with assistance from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the Ukrainian National Museum of Military History. The tank is set to remain outside of the embassy with the gun pointed right at it until Monday before touring through Europe. Ukraine's military said Friday that 3,363 Russian tanks so far have been destroyed in the bloody conflict. Now remember, that was from last Friday. That number has changed slightly. It's in the scroller. I updated it for today. But still, it's a lot. I'm looking at that tank in the photo, and that I don't think that's a T-72. I think that's a T-64 or a T-62A. But it's hard to tell from the side like that. Anyway, moving on. Told you we'd get through these quickly. Some of you may know who this is. Some of you may not know who this is. But you're about to. I recognize him. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev on Friday issued a direct threat against NATO after he called on Moscow to push Western defenses outside of Ukraine and across, quote, the borders of Poland. Medvedev, the current deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council, made several radical claims against the U.S., its NATO allies, and Ukraine in his Telegram post marking the one-year anniversary of the invasion. He repeated false talking points issued by Russian President Vladimir Putin, alleging that Russian troops are fighting against neo-Nazism in Ukraine, and suggested any attempts to restart peace talks will fail because of the West's determination to weaken Moscow and bleed it dry. His comments Friday coincided with Poland's first delivery of over a dozen German-made Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Polish Minister of National Defense Mariusz Błaszczak announced that at the start a National Security Council meeting, according to Ukreinform. President Biden met with leaders from the Bucharest 9 in Poland earlier this week to reaffirm the U.S.'s commitment to European security and to the alliance that flanks the Eastern Front. My dog's having a nightmare. Biden reminded Putin earlier this week of the principles of NATO's Article 5 Charter, which says that an attack against one NATO country will prompt a response from all 30 member nations, a war front that Russia is unlikely to be able to handle. I've said it to you many times, and I'll say it again, so it's absolutely clear, Biden said during a summit in Warsaw. Article 5 is a sacred commitment and the United States has made. We will defend literally every inch of NATO. Every inch. Russian expert and former DIA intelligence officer for Russian doctrine and strategy, Rebecca Koffler, dismissed Medvedev's comments as absurd and propagandist. The UK Defense Ministry on Friday assessed that Russia's strategy in Ukraine has once again changed after failing to make any significant gains since Kyiv began ousting Russian forces in September. Russian leadership is likely pursuing a long-term operation where they bank that Russia's advantages in population and resources will eventually exhaust Ukraine, the ministry says, adding that Russia plans to degrade the Ukrainian military rather than being focused on seizing substantial new territory. Give me just a sec. I gotta drag in another panelist right there. But it's not only Ukraine that Moscow has set its sights on. Russia has renewed threats made against Moldova, a former Soviet state west of Ukraine, and where a contingent of Russian sympathizers remain in an area known as Transnistria. Do you think they know which bathroom to use in Transnistria? Just saying. The Moldovan government on Thursday dismissed claims issued by Russia's defense ministry that suggested Ukraine planned to invade the Russian separatist region. The allegations came just 1 month after Ukrainian President Zelensky said that Kyiv had thwarted Russian plans to overthrow Moldova, which its government later confirmed. European nations have called on the U.S. to send more troops to be permanently stationed in the Baltic states, like Poland, as another deterrent against Russian aggression. That's backfilling. They want to backfill bodies. But as Koffler pointed out, threats issued against Moldova are not met with the same level of deterrence as those issued against NATO allies. Moldova is a different story, being a former Soviet republic, which is still not part of NATO, she says. Moldova is on Putin's target list. However, it's unlikely that Putin will go after Moldova at this time, as his military is stretched incredibly thin right now. Agreed. By the way, Hawaii Volcano Squad keeps bringing up balloons, and I have to mention this because it happened 2 days ago. I have received from this show, from YouTube, our first copyright claim that could lead to a strike. And it was based off of my use of a karaoke instrumental version of 99 Luftballons from the beginning of February. So I had to defend the show and appeal it under the threat of a strike if I lose, that the people that are putting this up against me, which I believe is Sony BMG, are idiots because I didn't use anything from them. I used a karaoke instrumental that was done by just some Joe Q public, and his credits are in the video that I had used for the audio. So hopefully that gets cleared up, but I just kept reading the balloon comments and I just realized, oh yeah, I forgot to tell him we got a potential strike coming on a show about a war. Anyway, moving on. I'll probably win that one. I've won 2 others already. I just never really made a big deal out of it. Okay. This one is called The State of Nukes. I think I remember this one. Oh, yeah. Okay. As Russia's barbaric assault on Ukraine begins its second year last Friday, President Biden and Russian President Putin clashed this week in a verbal sparring match with speeches marking the first anniversary of the war. While Biden continued his approach of shaming Putin into ending the war, issuing economic threats and offering more security aid to Kyiv, Putin shocked Washington with a nuclear warning, adding meat to previous warnings that the West must think twice this time before dismissing. During a surprise visit to Kyiv on Monday, Biden announced $500 million in security aid in addition to the $196 billion that the U.S. has already provided or committed to Kyiv. Again, Rick, if you had been paying attention, I have multiple sources. The president, echoing the Pentagon's stated goals to weaken Russia militarily and economically, affirmed his administration's policy of squeezing Russia's economic lifelines through sanctions, threatening to ramp up the already unprecedented costs against Moscow. How about the unprecedented costs for me because I can't buy Zenitco shit for my RPK? Anyway. Putin, a KGB-trained operative who prides himself in being an expert in people relations and being able to feel his audience, capitalized on Biden's threats by pushing his long-standing populist narrative that Russia is under assault by the West. They want to make the Russian people suffer with sanctions. He warned during a speech that lasted almost 2 hours. It's almost like he's doing a War Room episode. We will react accordingly because we are talking about the existence of our country, he said. The more long-range systems are supplied to Ukraine by the West, the further we will push the threat from our borders. You know, I think he's not wrong here, actually. And I know that sounds strange, but I think Putin's right. I think I think we are definitely we're pushing on him for sure. He's under assault by the West. I mean, think about it. Think of all the Adidas shit that we've pushed on him. Think about all the Happy Meals and Big Macs we used to push on him. Think about Starbucks being pushed on him. Think about fucking BMWs and Mercedes from other countries in Europe that have been pushed on him. What an assault, you idiot. Your people love these things. You have denied them these things because you're a dick. Anyway, moving on. In one of the most consequential speeches of his career, Putin announced the suspension of Russia's participation in the Nuclear START Treaty, which restricts the number of nuclear warheads on deployed missile launchers and strategic bombers for both Russia and Washington's limits Washington limits the number of security delivery platforms, such as intercontinental ballistic missiles. This step allows Russia to beef up its nuclear arsenal. Additionally, it eliminates the inspection program, under which both Russian and U.S. specialists could visit each other's atomic facilities. Come on, man, that shit never works. I mean, look how effective our inspections worked in Iran, and they're still spinning up centrifuges, and they're getting closer to fucking weapons-grade uranium or plutonium. That's a joke. Anyway, Putin also warned that the new strategic systems have been placed on combat duty and that Russia could resume nuclear testing, which Moscow has not done since 1990. I'm sure that's going to go real well. Like they're probably going to pull out the lead vests that have been dated since 1969, and like every person in the room is just going to grow a third eye. Anyway, Putin's plan for victory in Ukraine is to outsuffer and outlast the adversary, Russia's centuries-old wartime strategy. Culturally, Russia has a super high tolerance for casualties. It sacrificed 25 million of its own citizens in World War II. No, it didn't. Stalin killed them. Its current losses are estimated at 200,000 of killed or wounded. With Russia's population being more than 3 times Ukraine's, Putin is prepared to keep throwing bodies at the problem. Putin has mobilized an additional 500,000 troops since the war's start. Russia's defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, recently announced a 30% increase to the size of Russia's armed forces from 1.15 million to 1.5 million by 2026, or about the same time our M1 Abrams will finally make it to Ukraine. Putin is aware that Ukraine fatigue is setting in. The U.S. support among the public and politicians, especially against some Republicans, for funding and arming Ukraine is not as strong as it once was. Sorry, that sounded like a tongue twister. He also knows about the Pentagon's concerns about the depletion of U.S. weapon stockpiles as a result of significant outflows of weaponry to Ukraine, as China is becoming more belligerent with regard to Taiwan. Yes, you're right. We are depleting our stockpiles because we're sending a lot of stuff to Ukraine. The reason we're depleting our stockpiles is because we're not trying to buy it from China and North Korea to backfill it, you moron. No, instead we're probably going to have like, I don't know, a new deal where we kickstart the American war industry again, just to prove a point that we're going to outlast you. Anyway. Where did I leave off? These factors give Putin confidence that Russia could outlast Ukraine as its forces continue to exterminate Ukrainians and obliterate Ukraine's energy infrastructure, industrial base, and agricultural foundation. By pausing Russia's participation in the START Treaty, Putin is signaling his preparedness to bring his nuclear weapons into play. In his speech on Tuesday, he drew a direct link between the conflict in Ukraine and Russia's nuclear posture. Putin's verbal nuclear warning followed the implicit threat delivered by Russia's strategic bombers flying close to Alaska last week. In 2 separate incidents in a span of 2 days, the North American Aerospace Defense Command intercepted 8 Russian warplanes, which included nuclear-capable bombers and fighter jets. Putin's move to potentially dismantle the entire nuclear arms control regime, on which the world has relied on for decades for strategic stability, is viewed by Western analysts as disproportionately escalatory. Washington hopes to contain the conflict in Ukraine, but Putin's regime does not see this as limited. Loss of war in Ukraine is unthinkable for Putin, as it would mean NATO, an adversarial alliance, will end up in a hostile nation on Russia's doorstep. The Kremlin takes Washington's stated goals of weakening Russia at face value. The West wants to inflict a strategic defeat on us and sneak into our nuclear facilities, Putin said Tuesday. Washington has been training the Ukrainian military in Western warfare tactics since 2014. We also have been arming Kyiv with top-of-the-line high-tech weaponry for the past year, working to augment interoperability with NATO, and providing real-time intelligence and acquisition targeting to help Ukrainians. Putin believes that he faces a potential choice if he cannot win the war of attrition, of either letting NATO bleed out Russia militarily and economically, or using the nuclear card to flip the battlefield dynamics, stopping the bleeding and preventing NATO's expansion into what Russia considers its strategic security perimeter. The risk of Putin using his nuclear card in Ukraine will increase as the conflict goes on, and Moscow and Washington are climbing the escalation ladder. Expecting Putin to let Western arms flows hemorrhage Russia is not rational. Putin does not want to use his nuclear card, and Russia will certainly not launch a nuclear strike on the U.S. homeland outside a direct U.S.-Russia military conflict. However, Russian military doctrine does envision tactical nuclear employment on the battlefield to halt an escalating conflict. The strategic disconnect between Moscow and Washington is what Russia views as de-escalatory and defensive. NATO views as strategic escalation. Russian and U.S. leaders must understand, and soon, that their contradictory views and proxy war over Ukraine may well lead to a catastrophic outcome. In short, Putin realizes that being the leader of a destroyed world is meaningless. Being the president of a nation that is completely dead because of nuclear fallout is also pointless. But he is not beyond creating a buffer, a wall, so to speak, between Western civilization and Russian civilization by turning the Ukraine into a nuclear dead man's land. He would make it a radioactive wall if he feels like that is his only option. He thinks that he can outlast Ukraine because he has a military 3 times the size of Ukraine. We respond to that by giving Ukraine 3 times as many bullets to fire at Russians as the Russians can fire back. So you get 3 bullets to every one, you kill 3 Russians for every Ukrainian lost. You're starting to see the formula here. On top of that, this is a proxy war. And you've heard us saying it for months. This is nothing more than one giant global beta test of military hardware. I'll give you a perfect example of this. The US Sling Blade drone didn't exist until this war. And now we know it works. What else are we going to test next? Well, let's go see what an Abrams can do against a T-14 Armada if they could ever get one of those clapped out pieces of Soviet shit running. Because they probably won't. Anyway, how about we see what an F-35 or an F-22 can do against an Su-57? Because we can pick them up. We could probably hit them with a missile before they fire theirs. I think we outrange them. Stuff like that. I don't know. I mean, Russia likes to escalate or de-escalate through escalation, right? Who's to say that when they cross over into Russian airspace that they don't get shot out of the sky? That's a way of escalating or de-escalating through escalation, isn't it? I mean, maybe we should use a page out of their playbook, right? If they punch you in the nose, punch them back. That's the whole point. That's all they know. It's all terrorists know. Destroying Iran's underground nuclear facilities would also destroy the world. Elaborate on that. I think I know where you're going with that, but elaborate on that. Because I'm curious as to what your rationale behind that is. That's HVS in the chat, by the way, saying that. In the meantime, I'll go on to the next story. Bank, Pochna. Okay. There was hope the unprecedented and severe Western sanctions slapped on Russia after it invaded Ukraine would prompt Moscow to cave to pressure and change course. That hasn't happened yet, and on the surface, for now, Russia's getting by. I gotta drag him in here again? Yeah, I do. There you go. President Vladimir Putin may not have managed to adequately feed or arm his troops, but as we saw in his recent State of the Union address, he has these grandiose plans for projects like roads and schools and housing to all be upgraded and expanded this year in 2023. Such promised largesse is apparently part of the master plan Putin had since the beginning. The regime has tried to do everything, especially in the first few months of the war, so people in the big cities especially wouldn't feel the country is at war, said Peter Mironenko, editor of Russia's top independent economic news outlets, The Bell, adding that it is still a crime for Russian journalists to call it war. Prices did go higher last year in Russia, surely, but they got higher in Europe too, Mironenko added. He explained. Oh, I got the chat in there twice, don't I? Ah, okay. I was wondering why I kept seeing something scroll twice. Um, let's see. Prices did go higher last year in Russia, surely, but they got higher in Europe too, Mironenko added. He explained that most Russians are not particularly feeling the pinch. Despite expectations Russia's economy would tank last year, growth was only down 3%, and the International Monetary Fund expects modest growth this year as well. Putin in his speech boasted minimum wages have gone up 20% in 2022 and will go up another 18% this year. Loans would be handed out like candy if his words are this true. For now, it seems that Russia can pay for its war, so far boosted by its oil revenues. Energy prices rose in 2022. Russia raked in over $200 billion for it just last year alone. Though various schemes, however, a significant amount of petrol revenue is landing in the private sector. A mere detail, Mironenko says. He says that the state is already shaking companies down for some of their profits to help with the bottom line, and those companies are in no position to decline, probably because their CEOs would accidentally fall out of a 14-story window. But Russia's budget deficit is growing in recent months. Whopping was the word Mironenko used in our conversation, but its reserves remain large to the tune of at least 120 billion and public debt is low, he says. But there are two sides to every kopeck, and there are cracks in the edifice. Putin claims Russia's relative economic success during trying circumstances is not down to printing money, but Mironenko says that the Treasury effectively is doing that while cleverly keeping it from flowing too quickly into the economy to further drive prices up. So they're printing more money, but they're just not distributing it to the people, but more or less. The Russian president also made a big deal about record unemployment, which Mironenko points out is actually a problem when you consider that it has a lot to do with the massive brain drain caused by the war. Conservatively, 500 to 700,000 Russians have left since February of 22. Some suggest it's more like 1 million. The recent emigration was of highly educated and professional people, and it will create enormous problems for the labor market, Mironenko says. It is very tight. There was also a loss of manpower due to mobilization, so employers are having real trouble finding people. He also says that there is a supply chain problem and cities' massive delays. In cities' massive delays recently in the issuing of biometric passports, because there's just one factory in Russia that produces the chips that those require. Before the war, Russia could outsource most of the production, but not anymore. Imported consumer goods, however, are still finding their way in. Sanctions, it seems, will take a bit more time to have a real and visible impact on Russia. They didn't destroy the Russian economy at once, but they have put it on a path for a long and slow death. We have this figure of minus 3% growth in 2022, but the GDP was expected to rise by 3%. So we're actually talking about a difference of 6%, not minus 3. And if you have 10 years of economic growth or decline like this when the world economy is rising 3 to 4% a year, this would put Russia into a bad state. But it won't be quick. This guy's pretty optimistic. All right, so it looks like HVS answered my question earlier. One large ground strike is the end. It would send enough fallout into the stratosphere to irradiate the planet. You can't destroy underground bunkers with an air burst. Nuclear weapons power has increased exponentially since Hiroshima. That's correct. But if you were to destroy a nuclear bunker underground, you would simply use a bunker buster, and it would be contained in the ground. Or maybe... What's that one weapon that the
More than
Russians
likely, the
revealed?
blast would vaporize the ground.
Well, yeah, but the other thing is what would you... Thermobaric weapon, right? So
Yeah.
you would use a bunker buster warhead to go through these layers, get down to that thing. The thermobaric weapon would suck all the oxygen out of the room and everybody dies. And then you just seal it shut. Done. I'm sure it's not that simple. It's just we have learned from the Russians, use a thermobaric weapon. Use a
No, we
vacuum
learned that
bomb.
in Afghanistan.
Yeah, use a vacuum bomb. Just
Because that's what we were doing with the caves in Afghanistan.
thermobarics?
Yep.
Yeah. Now, okay, if you suck all the air out of the room or you burn all the air out of the room or whatever, yes, the hole that you punched in is going to spew crap back out. That is undeniable. But it's going to be in a remote part of Iran where they've been hiding this facility for the longest time anyway, right? And then you just got to bury it. Like, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not claiming to know. I think it's an interesting theory, so that's why I wanted to know the answer. So I'm glad you spelled it out. And you're right. Even if you did it, you can't go down there. You can't go inside it. You can't wear a gas mask or a radiation suit to see how well you did. That's true. But we don't know how deep this is, right? Like, what if this goes down a mile? What if it goes down like 2 miles? What if it's like Cheyenne Mountain Complex? Whatever it is. I'm sure it could be somewhat contained, but there's never going to be zero fallout. I would agree with that. All right, let me move on because we still have a shitload of stories. I thought we'd go through these quicker. This isn't a cave we're talking about. We're talking about hardened concrete bunkers. Well, yeah. I mean, think about... What was the name of that bunker that the Germans had where it had like a 30-foot concrete thick roof? And like the British
You're
had to use
thinking of
earth...
the submarine pens.
And then the British had to use earthquake bombs to just crack the roof open, right?
And even that didn't work.
Right, so they brought the mountain down around it instead and just buried it. Because
No,
they couldn't punch through it, so they just buried everything around it. Wasn't that it?
No, the submarine pens, they used the tall boys.
Yeah.
They used everything in the arsenal.
Yeah.
And they couldn't knock them out.
So they never cracked, is what you're saying.
No.
Right, but I thought they
after the
leveled
war,
everything
they
around it
tried-
to kind of get it like where you couldn't get in it.
No. Oh, they did that, yes. But, like, 46, 47, somewhere around there.
Mm.
They actually, the French took them over after the war.
They dug it out
Used
and found
them
out there was
for-
no damage.
No, they used them for decades after the war for their subs.
Yeah, like
But
I've seen
eventually
pictures
they
of that.
tried blowing it up, and they used an ungodly amount of explosives.
I've seen pictures of that.
Military-grade explosives, and they still couldn't drop it. And they had plenty of time to drill everywhere, pack explosives everywhere they possibly could. And they still couldn't do it.
Well, Germans are some of the world's greatest engineers, right? It's
Used to
pretty
be
hard
anyways.
to deny. All right. Okay. Well, all right. I'm not saying I disagree with you, HVS. You're right. It's just I'm sure there's a different way to crack that egg. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe we just have to liquefy the sand around it and just put a big glass top on it or whatever. I don't know. All I know is every time we do a nuclear deal with Iran, they're just laughing at us because they're just like, yeah, sure. We got these 10 sites. You can inspect this one. And they just move everything out of that one into the 9 other ones. Yes, that is true. A lot of guys died because of that. All right, let me move on because we still have a bunch of stories to get through. Actually, we're about halfway through. All right. Sean Penn. This is Saturday, by the way. Finally made it to Saturday, day 367, 225. Sean Penn is doubling down on his call for the United States to supply Ukraine with modern fighter jets amid the country's war against Russia. The 62-year-old actor who first pressed the White House on Ukraine's need for jets last March said that President Biden's surprise trip to Kyiv this week to mark the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion was extremely encouraging. However, he stressed that the U.S. continues sending military aid, including modern aircraft, to the war-torn nation. There's no scenario where Ukraine loses this battle, the two-time Academy Award winner told Politico in an interview that was published on Friday. He continued, there's a scenario where the territory is taken and Putin buys his way into fighting insurgents throughout a broken infrastructure of a broken country. But the Ukrainians are going to fight till the last drop of blood, and that drop of blood will be on our hands if we don't faithfully equip them. 2 weeks after Russia invaded Ukraine, the Milk Star took to Twitter to urge the U.S. and Polish governments to provide Ukraine with fighter jets. I just got off a call with President Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, he wrote on March 9th. Somewhere in the bureaucratic chain between our White House and the Polish government, the desperately needed jets are not yet delivered to Ukraine. Public outcry may find the bottleneck. Poland had offered to give its entire fleet of MiG-29 fighter jets to the U.S. in exchange for a chance to buy American F-16s as part of a deal to bolster the Ukrainian Air Force while upgrading their own with NATO aircraft. Now, sidebar. I remember specifically, way back then, that we talked about this, and I said, look at the deal that Ukraine is getting. Poland is donating all their MiGs. I think it was like, 29 of them or something? 27 of them? All the MiGs and all the spare parts for those MiGs and all the weapons they had for those MiGs. They were like, we will gift this to Ukraine so they can defend their homeland if you let us buy your jets. They weren't asking us to give them the jets. They were going to give theirs away and then buy our jets. What a deal for everyone, right? Like, Ukraine gets jets, United States industry gets a big payday, and we get to build them F-16s. Win-win. And what happened? We are led by idiots who squandered that deal. Morons. However, the Pentagon announced later that it would not support Poland's proposal, referring to the move as too high risk for escalating tensions with Russia. The following month, Penn called for buyers from the private sector to spend $300 million to buy 2 squadrons of U.S.-made F-15 or F-16 fighter jets, adding that 12 aircraft with better tech than Russian MiGs or Sukhois. One billionaire could end the war in Ukraine, he wrote. Of course, there are add-ons in arming and maintaining creative runways, etc., but it seems worth looking into. The actor has since deleted his Twitter account, probably because too many trolls started shitting on him for it. Penn has reiterated his calls for Ukraine to be supplied with more advanced aircraft during media interviews and in private conversations with medias of Congress. The Mystic River actor explained that the fighter jets that the Ukrainians are currently using are insufficient to combat Russia's more advanced aircraft. The Ukrainians are still flying without guided missile systems, so they actually have to get a visual on the Russian MiGs to shoot them down. I don't think that's true. He continued, whereas the Russian fighter jets can lock in, fire a guided missile from 100 kilometers out, and then duck back into safe airspace. That part is true. The Ukrainian MiGs have guided missile systems. That is undeniable. The Russians have a more advanced version that outranges the Ukrainian MiGs missiles. So what happens is they go up in the air, they're flying a patrol. They don't even realize the missiles are inbound until it's too late before they can shoot back. That's the difference. Like if you have a missile that shoots 75 miles range and they have one that has 100, they have a 25-mile advantage on you. That's the real problem here. The Biden administration has faced mounting pressure to provide Ukraine with modern fighter jets, from both Republican and Democratic lawmakers, as well as some Ukrainian officials, including President Zelensky. Last month, Biden told a White House reporter no when asked if he planned to send Ukraine F-16 fighter jets. During his interview with Politico, Penn recalled being in Kyiv when Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th of 2022. He had a meeting with Zelensky the night before the invasion in which the president agreed to participate in Penn's documentary about the conflict Superpower. We went back to our hotel and closed our eyes for about 2 hours, and all of a sudden the missiles and rockets started coming in, he remembers. The actor remained in Ukraine for the next few days to continue filming after Russia's invasion. According to Politico, he has returned to the country 6 times, including a November visit when he gave his Oscar statuette to Zelensky. His most recent visit took place last week when he screened Superpower, which premiered on February 17th this year for Zelensky. Penn told Politico that Zelensky was clearly realistic about the likelihood that Russia would invade Ukraine during his first meeting with the president back on February 23rd. However, Penn said that Zelensky could not have possibly known that he could so completely rise to the occasion of the actuality. It was immediately clear that when he walked into the room on February 24th that we were witnessing the newfound embodiment of an historic courage and leadership, Penn told the outlet. There was resolve in his eyes, and Zelensky was not going anywhere. And you know what? He's still there, isn't he? Moving on.
Mm-hmm.
This guy. Now, I didn't know who he was until recently. CIA Director William Burns said in an interview, oh, by the way, Sunday now, day 368. My mistake. CIA Director William Burns said in an interview set to air Sunday that the United States is confident that China is considering providing lethal equipment to Russia to support Moscow's war against Ukraine. How confident are you in the intelligence that this is something Xi Jinping himself may change his mind about? CBS Face the Nation host Margaret Brennan asked Burns in a sit-down interview. Hang on, I gotta drag Jaime in here. He's got serious connection issues today.
Yep.
Well, we're confident that the Chinese leadership is considering it, the provision of lethal equipment, Burns says. We also don't see that a final decision has been made yet, and we don't see evidence of actual shipments of said lethal equipment. And that's why I think Secretary Blinken and the President have thought it important to make very clear what the consequences of that would be. To deter it, he affirms, because it would be a very risky and unwise bet. So why would Beijing risk a tailspin in its relationship with the United States and with Europe by crossing this line, Brennan asked. It's a good question, and that's why I hope very much that they don't, Burns says. He recalls how he flew to Kyiv on the cusp of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, warning President Zelensky that the most recent intelligence suggested Vladimir Putin was planning what he thought would be a lightning strike from the Belarusian border to seize Kyiv in a matter of a few days, and also seize an airport northwest of Kyiv called Gostomel, which he wanted to use as a platform to bring in airborne troops as a way, again, of accelerating that lightning conquest of Kyiv. I do think that the role of intelligence in this instance, while we're able to provide to President Zelensky not just on that trip, but throughout the course of the war, has helped him defend his country with such courage and tenacity, Burns said. I think that made a contribution early, just before the war had started. Last weekend, Secretary Antony Blinken, who met with China's top diplomat Wang Yi in Munich, Germany, for the first time since the Chinese surveillance balloon controversy, said that the U.S. has evidence Beijing is considering providing lethal support, such as ammunition and weapons, to Russia. I agree with the administration for beginning to expose what they have picked up, likely in intelligence circles, that China is getting ready to provide some military lethal aid to Russia. Retired four-star Army General Jack Keane similarly stated that I think coming out and exposing, and I would go further to tell them, what we think they are attempting to provide, China will pull back, likely after that public exposure. At a briefing on Monday, China's foreign ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin, Bang Ding Ao, countered, sorry, I couldn't help it, countered that it is the U.S., not China, that has been pouring weapons into the battlefield. The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. We would never stand for finger pointing or even coercion for pressurizing from the U.S. and our relations with Russia, he says. China will continue to stay firm on the side of peace and dialogue and play a constructive part in easing the situation. Is that right? So,
The Chinese will provide lethal aid. The U.S. will then respond by sanctioning China, thereby destroying
yes.
their economy.
Well,
You
okay,
can
so
kind of see the writing on the wall.
this question came up in a different forum that I'm a part of. And the question is was it us or was it the British, seized hundreds of thousands of weapons from the Iranians that was bound for Yemen?
From China.
No, from Yemen. And
For Yemen.
yeah, but it was from Iran. And then we
Yeah.
donated them to the Ukrainians, which I think is great, right? I think it was one of the stories from last week, actually. I had a picture of a boat with just all these AKs and RPKs and just everything that a growing American boy just aspires to own, right? Like all those wonderful Slav weapons. I was just like, oh, give me all of it. And we seized all of it, right? And it's like, China. Okay? If they're going to provide lethal aid to Russia, they're going to have to do it the slowest way possible. They're going to have to put it on trains, and they're going to have to run through Mongolia, up into mainland Russia,
Mongolia.
and very, very, very far to the west of Russia.
Mongolia? What the hell are Mongolians doing here?
Think of how many tens of thousands of rail miles that those arms have to travel. Or they could try to put them on a boat, and then someone can go, wow, that's a really nice boat. Be kind of unfortunate if something happened to it as you hear the whoosh of a Mark 48 torpedo being released. Just saying. Anyway, in my other forum circles, we were asked, how could the world punish China if they decide to get themselves involved? And I think my answer was the quickest and most abrupt and most effective. It's easy. The entire world pulls out of China completely. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, think about what China is known for. They are the world's manufacturer of cheap labor. The entire world depends on China for cheap labor. Everything is made in China. Everything is being wish.com'd and Alibaba'd and put on container ships by the billions,
Alibaba.
right? All this stuff is
Alibaba.
coming out of China. And it's like, you want to punish them? Pull out. Take all your manufacturing contracts that you had with China and tear them up and outsource your stuff to India overnight.
They are starting to.
Right. But do it overnight. Everybody does it unanimously. Boom. China, fuck you. Boom. Right? They're all out. And then when China goes, well, fine, you still owe us for trade deficits. And then we'll just say, we don't owe you shit. We're just going to default on it. Everyone defaults on China's loan on trade deficits with China. Their economy goes straight to the shitter. Because how are they going to collect on a world's trade deficit if everybody involved says, we're not paying you? No. Kiss our ass. They would die economically in a month. Gone. Because who would be left to buy their shit? Russia? Okay. North Korea? They're broke. Iran? They're broke. Sort of.
No.
They're sanctioned.
Not anymore,
so they're
thanks to
mostly
Obama.
broke. But you see the point? Like, they would have no market left. That's how you cripple them.
Yeah, how you piss them off?
Yeah. I have a story about that, actually. It's the second to last story. Trust me, you're going to love that one. They're
Oh, I don't
pissed.
know.
Oh, no, they're pissed. They're real pissed. You'll see. Promise.
If it has something to do with Formosa, yes.
Has that and a lot of boom. A lot of boom boom.
Mhm.
You'll
Oh,
see.
I know about that.
Okay. That's the part that really pisses them off.
Oh, no. This is on the diplomatic side.
Well, I mean, what we did was basically a diplomatic bitch slap to them. I kind of like it. Anyway.
Well, what do they keep begging about
Well, yeah,
that
they're
we
contesting
not
islands.
do with that particular island
They're contesting islands, but then
diplomatically?
they will always contest islands.
What would they do if, for instance, the U.S. led a coalition to officially recognize that particular island?
We could do that. I'm okay with
That
that.
would drive them nuts.
I'm okay with that. I mean, they are technically the old government of the country anyway.
And they are independent.
They are independent. It's like, I mean, we're just pushing things along, just nudging it along, right? All right, let me move on. All right. Russian President Vladimir Putin's regime will fall to an uprising of his own people. Don't you remember us talking about that before? Ukrainian President Zelensky predicted that this week. He made his comments in a new documentary filmed to mark the one-year anniversary of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, which did pass last Thursday. In it, Zelensky predicts that the Russian people will, quote, find a reason to overthrow Putin's regime. There will certainly be a moment when the fragility of Putin's regime is felt in Russia. Zelensky says this in his documentary, according to Business Insider. Then, carnivores will eat the carnivore. It is very important, and they need a reason to justify this. They will recall the words of Komarov, of Zelensky. They will remember. They will find a reason to kill the killer. Will it work? Yes. When? I don't know, he says. Zelensky went on to say that Putin has a very narrow circle of people he trusts, arguing that the Russian leader is in isolation and he doesn't know what to do. Ukraine warned for months that Russia was planning to renew its offensive sometime around the one-year anniversary of the invasion. Yes, it'll be tough, and we have to be ready for it. We must remain maximum calm. Alexei Danilov, the head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, told Ukrainian TV earlier in February. U.S. defense officials have agreed with Ukrainian President Zelensky's warnings, saying it is likely that Putin will try an offensive in an effort to turn the tables after months of Ukraine regaining territory. The situation on the front line is complicated, Zelensky said in a sit-down interview with Trey Yingst, who you may know was the combat correspondent on Fox News. Russia's preparing for a rematch. We can feel this. I believe that it has already started, or not fully. We'll see what will happen in the next week. Ukrainian forces are killing nearly 1,000 troops a day in the conflict, and they've eliminated 5,000 troops in a single battle at the end of January, according to the UK Ministry of Defense. That's pretty good. That's effective. They will kill the killer. The problem is, the Soviet proletariat is an unarmed person. So it's very hard to amass a militia with nothing more than a few shotguns and a lot of pitchforks and stones and, oh wait, Molotov cocktails. That might work.
Oh, wait, Russian black market. You buy nuclear submarine.
Didn't we just release the Lord of War? Maybe he could sell him one.
You buy nuclear
Funny how
submarine,
that
you get
timing
diesel
happened.
sub for free.
Yeah.
Funny how that timing happened.
It'll still be quieter than any sub that the Chinese ever put out in the ocean. It's true.
Supposedly the newest is pretty quiet.
We can still hear
like
it.
1980s Russian quiet.
Sure, like 80s Russian quiet, exactly. Be like, we can hear that thing way out in Pearl. Some of y'all know that quote.
But before that, they were like 1950s Russian quiet.
I know, but I mean, even then, they're still, like, by the time that they realize that they've been heard by a Los Angeles class sub, there's going to be like 6 Mark 48s already on the way. And they're not going to be like, oh shit, what do we do?
We don't have many of those actually left.
Mark 48s? Or Los Angeles class?
688s.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. I mean,
because now they've got the Virginias.
Yeah, I was just picking something old that can still hear their latest and greatest. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure we could put a Baleo out there and hear it. But that's a diesel sub! Telling you, the world needs a little more Lieutenant Commander Thomas Dodge. Just saying. We all do. All right. I'm going to show you a man named Cardan, but it's not Pierre Cardan.
Well, no offense, the USS Rust-Oleum here.
Just, I'm getting tetanus just looking at it.
Yeah.
Senator Ben Cardin. Cardan? Cardin. Your choice. I don't know. I don't think he doesn't sound French. Anyway, let's say Cardin. Ben Cardin, Democrat, Maryland, warned China against sending lethal military aid to help Russia fight against Ukraine, suggesting that the U.S. could respond by imposing sanctions against the Chinese government. We'll just defect on our loans. China needs to know that there will be consequences. We've isolated Russia economically. We can do the same thing in regard to sanctions against China. Why don't we just... Aren't they building another Titanic? Be like, what a nice boat. It'd be unfortunate if something happened to it on its maiden voyage. Anyway, Cardin's comments came after multiple reports said China is considering sending artillery shells to Russia as the Russian military depletes its supply of ammunition a year into its invasion of Ukraine. If I was a Chinese Lord of War, I would send them artillery shells, fireworks, and just be like, "Oh, well, you said artillery shells. You didn't say what kind." So just so you can get them to cut checks and bankrupt them a little faster. Anyway, China needs to understand that they need to be on the right side of history here. China should be with us. Yeah, it sounds like what a Democrat would say, wasn't it? The senator referenced the United Nations General Assembly approving a non-binding resolution on Thursday, the eve of the first anniversary of Russia's invasion, calling for Russia to end hostilities in Ukraine and withdraw its forces. The resolution passed 141 to 7 with 32 abstentions. China was one of the countries that abstained from the vote. China sat on the sidelines on that vote, said Cardin. That was wrong. During the interview, Cardin also called China a major threat, decrying the Chinese government for not standing with most of the world against Russia's war in Ukraine. I do not think that China is a major threat against the United States, said Cardin. They're encouraging this Russia-Ukraine war by working with Russia, now perhaps providing additional weapons for Russia to be able to pursue this war of aggression. This is an attack on the sovereignty of a democratic state. There is no question that Ukraine is on the front line. But Russia will not stop there, and China is assisting that. China expressed anger this past week after the Biden administration suggested that it was considering sending weapons and ammunition to Russia to help its war against Ukraine, saying that the U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. It is the U.S., not China, that has been pouring weapons onto the battlefield, Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman Wang Wenbin, Bang Ding Ao, said. The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. We would never stand for finger-pointing or even coercion in pressurizing from the U.S. in our relationships with Russia. The latest poll done on Fox News' website released on Sunday found that 68% of Americans think that China is a major threat to the U.S., and another 26% see the country as a minor threat. Only 6% believe China poses no threat to the U.S. I'm with the 68%, said Cardin. So, I just want to brush on something, because that was a short story. I want to brush on something here.
Okay.
He says that China's not a major threat, right? He's a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
He says China's not a major threat. The last time a Democrat said that an Asian nation was not a major threat, that Asian nation had its
Attacked us.
oil supplies cut from the United States. And that forced them into attacking us. But they weren't a threat. Remember, they weren't a threat. But we shut the oil spigot off of a nation who doesn't have any domestic oil production. And they amassed one of the largest naval carrier forces in world history and completely decimated the entire Pacific battleship and heavy cruiser fleet in a single day. But remember, they weren't a major threat. This guy...
Funny how that seems to happen always under a Democrat.
Yeah. This guy says China's not a major threat. China is physically multitudes larger. They have a population of 2 billion people. They have a steel industry that can produce ships that the rest of the world is buying, including a copy of the Titanic.
I think that
And,
actually got canceled
and again,
and
they
scrapped.
have no domestic oil production.
Well, to be fair, that copy they're building of the Titanic,
It's being
that's
backed by an Australian.
it's strictly just the hotel, and it's landlocked.
It wasn't originally supposed to be. But I know
No.
what you're saying. I get what you're saying. But the point is, in terms of physical size, population size, industrial capabilities, and the fact that they too are a non-oil producing country, they don't pose a threat. You fucking moron. They are a threat. They have always been a threat. They will always be a threat. And the fact of the matter
I would
is,
argue.
the world created it. We made them the threat they are
I
today.
would even argue they are a bigger threat than Russia.
Yeah, because they hold the IOU slips of the entire fucking world because of
No, they
because
already
of national
possess
trade
3 times
deficits.
as many aircraft carriers.
Well, because Russia can't build one.
Exactly. Because guess where they used to build aircraft carriers for Russia?
Vladivostok.
No. There was one shipyard that they controlled in Europe that was capable of building ships that big.
Wasn't that in Sevastopol or Crimea or something?
Yep.
Yeah, and they hold Crimea.
Her.
They know, they really do.
No, for now.
For now. Moving on. That guy, he's an idiot. China's not a threat. You're the first person that we're going to hang for treason when China becomes a threat. In your face. Anyway. I'm telling you, dude.
Oh, Fetterman's going to do it for us.
I'm telling you, the world needs another John C. Woods. I mean, if you look at that guy, see, another connection issue. You look at that guy, and then you look at Murdoch, right? And you're about to see Koberger. The world needs another John C. Woods, the hangman of Nuremberg. For those of you who don't know who the hell I'm talking about, just look him up. John C. Woods, amazing story. Guy was cruel, but in a
No.
very judicial way.
What we need is another Colonel von Steffenberg.
One eye, one hand, failed to bomb.
Yeah,
Put the bomb on the wrong side of the table. No, we don't need another guy like that. He failed. And he died for it.
Failed, but he also had the balls to try it.
John C. Woods actually found creative ways to torture the people he was hanging at Nuremberg.
That's being sadistic.
That's why we need him. He's the man. He's the hero we
With
need right
zero
now.
risk to himself.
Yeah, he's the hero we need right now. Sorry.
He's the hero we need, but not the one we deserve.
I think we deserve him too. Actually, the victims deserve him. Anyway, moving on before we get struck for, I don't know, sedition, whatever.
Copyright.
I'm screwed anyway. Monday, February 27th, day 369. We're almost there. Global security was flung into a state of ambiguity last week after Russian President Vladimir Putin suspended Moscow's participation in the New START treaty and forced the U.S. to re-enter an age of nuclear instability. The suspension of the treaty marks the first time since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the conclusion of the Cold War that the U.S. and Russia are not actively engaged in a joint nuclear treaty. We are entering an extremely dangerous decade in which nuclear deployment or employment is once again a potential, says Rebecca Heinrichs, a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute and an expert on strategic deterrence. Thinking about it in a realistic way needs to be back into American consciousness. President Biden called Putin's decision a big mistake, and reports have since surfaced suggesting that Russia may be planning to deploy new nuclear systems as experts question what is next for nuclear deterrence amid the war in Ukraine. Heinrichs explained that nuclear deterrence is no longer just about restricting the number of arms a nation can have at its disposal, it's about countering nuclear capabilities. Whenever you think about deterrence, she began, It's not about numbers, it's also about what we have. The expert explained that deterrence only works if an adversarial nation thinks that any action they carry out could be adequately responded to with equal or a greater threat to their own security. Moscow already knows that the US has powerful nuclear warheads. The threat of nuclear warfare is not on the same level as it was in the 20th century when the core principle of deterrence was established between Washington and Moscow, mutually assured destruction. The top threat now lies in how nuclear weapons can be employed in the theater of war and whether the US can appropriately respond to low-yield nuclear capabilities, tactical nukes. If the Russians are going to threaten to launch a weapon in the European theater, do we have sufficient kinds of weapons that they would believe that we would respond with? Heinrich's questions. Are they really going to believe that we're going to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile at their missile sites if they launch a low-yield nuclear weapon in Ukraine? No. Heinrich said that Russia has been doggedly focused on creating more advanced capabilities in the US in terms of nuclear delivery systems for the last 15 years. When we think about nuclear modernization for ourselves, we're talking about maintaining our systems, she says. Russians think about modernizing their nuclear weapons by making new ones. But Russia's withdrawal from the treaty also points to an emerging threat that has become increasingly evident following Putin's invasion of Ukraine, Russia's burgeoning ties with China. Notice a pattern here. It's always going back to China. China. Putin's decision to ditch the New START treaty coincided with a visit from China. Their top diplomat, just days after Secretary Antony Blinken revealed that Beijing was considering providing lethal aid to Russia, a move that would not only escalate the war in Ukraine, but would exacerbate already strained geopolitical relations between China and the West. China has said that it has no plans to provide Russia with arms, but security officials remain weary and wary of the relationship. Everything is timed, Heinrich said when asked about the significance of Putin's announcement. Those two countries continue to move closer. We're back to the point where you have enemies that, no kidding, want to replace the United States as the preeminent power, and they're investing in nuclear weapons, she added. Heinrichs pointed not only to the shared rhetoric that Putin and his Chinese counterpart President Xi Jinping have used in demonizing the U.S., but in China's expanding nuclear program. The security expert said that she could not speculate on nuclear cooperation between the two nations, but highlighted that the Russia-China partnership has expanded because they share a common objective in removing the U.S. as top dog from the world order. From a U.S. defense perspective, we have to assume the worst, she says, regarding nuclear security when it comes to both Russia and China. Despite China's unchecked nuclear expansion, the U.S. and Russia still account for roughly 90% of the world's nuclear arsenal. According to data provided by the Arms Control Association, with nearly 12,000 nuclear warheads in existence between the two, and obviously, as Scott rightly points out, we never tell you exactly how many we've got. Under the original Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, START, signed in 1991 by President George H.W. Bush and Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev, Washington and Moscow agreed to start clearing out their nuclear stockpiles, which reached their peak in 1985 when more than 70,000 warheads reportedly made up global inventories. The State Department warned last month that Russia was not complying with the stipulations laid out under the New START Treaty, which was renewed by Russia and the U.S. in February 2021 for another 5 years, by refusing to facilitate inspection activities and bilateral consultative meetings. It is unclear how Russia will proceed now that it is no longer adhering to the treaty that restricted either Washington or Moscow from deploying more than 1,550 nuclear warheads at a time on delivery systems like ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, or heavy bombers. However, the nuclear security expert said she's not concerned that a nuclear war is looming. Instead, Heinrichs encouraged Americans to press on their leaders on what is being done to ensure U.S. nuclear capabilities could adequately hold up against modern adversaries. So, previous story, Democrat says China's not a threat. This story, person says we shouldn't worry about nuclear war. We shouldn't worry about their nuclear capabilities. We should only worry about ours. Well, yeah, that's part of it. I don't know. I think we should go back to that thing where I was saying that we should bring back Strategic Air Command patrols. You know,
Mhm.
the thing with the Super Tucanos. I think if we started doing something like that, just between say we flew ours from, let's see, original SAC. One of the original SAC flights was B-36s out of just outside of Dallas. They'd go all the way up to Alaska and all the way back, right? Be a full day trip back and forth, right? Imagine if we did something like that, say from Seattle, Washington to Alaska, right? And all right, so a Super Tucano, 8.5 hours flight. Even from Seattle, it would probably have to stop and land or midair fuel in Juneau, and then maybe fly to Wales, Alaska, which is the far westernmost part of the state, before you go into the Bering Strait. So we'd have to do something like that, right? Do that flight, and then you also fly from, say, I don't know, San Antonio, Texas, and you fly halfway down through Mexico or something. Because you got to watch your backyard too, right? You can't just go assuming that it's all going to come from the north. Chinese have a damn naval base in South America, for God's sakes, right? They can come up Central America, right up your backside. So you got to watch that too. Bring that back first. That's the first deterrent. Protect the homeland. That deterrent. Because apparently we forgot how to do that too. We were too busy calling, people who hate CRT as, domestic terrorists or some bullshit. Next story.
Somebody's been watching congressional testimony.
Something like that. So I called this one No Fear. China's foreign ministry accused the U.S. of outright bullying Monday after several Chinese companies were hit with sanctions for their ties to human rights abuses in Ukraine and Africa. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning argued that U.S. sanctions were illegal, claiming that U.S. lethal aid to Ukraine was no different from China supporting Russian forces. The U.S. sanctions are designed to target the Russian Wagner Group, a mercenary organization, but China argued the impacts on its companies have no basis in international law or authorization from the Security Council and are typical, illegal, unilateral sanctions. While the U.S. has intensified its efforts to send weapons to one of the parties of the conflict, resulting in an endless war, it has frequently spread false information about China's supply of weapons to Russia, taking the opportunity to sanction Chinese companies for no reason, she says. This is outright bullying and double standards. The U.S. sanctions hit the Changsha Tianyi Space Science and Technology Research Institute, which allegedly provided satellite imagery to Ukraine to the Wagner Group. The sanctions come as U.S. officials warn that China is considering lethal aid to Russian forces in Ukraine. Reports suggest China may soon deliver artillery shells to replenish Russia's dwindling stores. Both Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warned Russia against providing such aid on Sunday, though China has bristled at the statements. The U.S. is in no position to tell China what to do. You've already heard me tell you this part 1,000 times. That's the whole quote. They did the whole thing again. Here's the thing, though. We're not providing weapons to one party of the conflict to result in an endless war. We're providing weapons to a nation that had been invaded illegally, and they are defending their territory. They're not on the offensive. They are on the defensive until the very last Russian is pushed out of their country. If a Ukrainian soldier takes one step into Russian territory proper, not Crimea, because that was never really theirs, okay? I'm talking about if they stepped into actual Russia, then you have an argument that the Ukrainians are on the offensive. But until that day comes, sit down, shut the fuck up, and go make me a sandwich. Because you clearly have no fucking idea what you're talking about. Anyway. I just think that you're not on the offensive while you're on the defensive. You're just pushing invaders out. And that's well within your rights to do so. That's not an endless war. It would end if the aggressor would fuck off. That's when it would end. You can't ask the defender to quit. It's not their fault in the first place. They didn't ask for this. Nobody asked for this. Moving on. Tuesday, February 28th, day 370. Those numbers we hear about Vladimir Putin's approval rating at a whopping 80+% mostly come from the Levada Center. It is Russia's only independent pollster. The rate of response to its outreach is about 27%, and its polls are conducted in person. Even if polls in Russia are not thought to be highly accurate, given the fear factor, they are an important indicator of trends. The director of Levada, Denis Volkov, reflected on the high approval rating among Russians for the war in Ukraine at 75%, giving a bit of context. Now, this guy was interviewed by Fox News, so that's my source for this one. It's important to understand, Volkov says, that there are several reasons for these high numbers of support. One is consolidation, the rally behind the flag effect. The other is that people don't feel the war affects them and their lives directly. It feels far away to many, and that is exactly how Vladimir Putin wants it. Volkov explained that Putin got a ratings boost from the war similar to the so-called Crimea consensus that caused his popularity to rise similarly after he annexed Crimea in 2014, illegally, mind you. His ratings had over time made their way back down to about 66% just before the February 24th invasion. Not only did they shoot back up into the 80s after he attacked Ukraine, but counterintuitively, when you look at how the war is going, how little land has been captured, and how many men have been killed, Levada polling shows a morale boost among Russians in the wake of the war. We saw optimism going up, pride, self-esteem, and hopes for the future. Levada's polling shows Russians dislike the United States in equal measure for their like of Putin. That number has been high for some time. What I find surprising is the expressed Russian readiness to blame the West, and specifically the United States, for the war that Putin himself started. This has a very long history behind it. Part of the history is experience with the Cold War, Volkov says. When the Cold War was over, there was a very short period of hope, and what now have become illusions that the United States and Russia could be friends, partners, and there was a feeling that if anyone could help Russia, it could be the United States, not even Europe. Then these hopes, these illusions, didn't come true. Volkov goes on to say that what we also see in our surveys, that all conflicts Russia has taken part in over the past decades were understood as conflicts between Russia and the United States, from Georgia to Syria. So blaming the West is nothing new. The stakes just feel a lot higher now. Volkov says that there is a difference between dislike towards the United States as a system, as feelings about American people and culture. And if older Russians are more skeptical, more pro-Putin and more anti-American, then young people are more positive. And that, he adds, scares the government as well as the older generations. They're fond of Western culture, American mass culture, music, and movies. And they, Volkov said, are making the government and the older generations quite nervous because of this. Now, as I read you this story, I was getting madder and madder and madder, because I was like, this sounds like an old goat taking the opinions of his fellow old goats that are all derelict Cold War relics. But when I got to the end of this story, I finally started to get a little positive feeling about this because even he sees the writing on the wall. The youth of Russia do not hate America, and the youth of Russia does not hate the West because they like McDonald's, they like Adidas, they like Reebok, they like Starbucks, they like iPhones. Okay? They got a taste of the capitalism Kool-Aid. Some of them were born into it. They've never known communism. This whole thing about Russia trying to bring back the Soviet Union 1961 map, they think
The good old days.
it's fucking ridiculous. They're like, why would I want to go back to channel 1 being state TV and channel 2 being a KGB officer demanding I go back to channel 1? Why do I want to go back to that when I can jerk off to OnlyFans? That's what they're thinking. Okay, let's be real. The human condition is simple. Keep your belly full and your noodle wet. It's that simple. There's nothing else. And this fucker here wants to take it away from them. They want their OnlyFans. I'm just telling you. Take that away from them, they're going to get upset. They're going to get sexually repressed, and then the killer will be killed, as Zelensky said a couple stories ago, because they can't jerk off. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Sorry.
Yeah, Sean would be an expert on this.
Sorry. I can turn anything into perversion, I'm sure. But, you know, it's not far off if you think about it. If you oppress people enough times, then there's only a couple of things they can do to de-stress. Drink and bang, right? There's not much else. And you take that away from them, you're going to have some really pissed off people. You're going to have an army of Warsaw Patriots. Let me just put it to you that way. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying that because the guy's very repressed. He can be angry on a whim. And he sometimes is well within his rights to be so, considering the laws in his state, right? So it's like, imagine an
And
entire
then
nation
sometimes
of that.
he's irrationally angry.
Yes, but I mean, I'm just trying to say in that regard, imagine an entire nation like that. Like, that would just be hilarious.
Or a nation of alcoholic fueled drunks.
No, there's not going to be an army of me.
I was referring to Russia.
Oh, well, maybe I should lead them in that army then. I don't know.
Maybe you need to go take Putin out.
Just turn it into one giant drunken orgy. All right, moving
It
on.
worked for the
I think I've
Romans.
only got like 5 or 6 or 7 stories left, but they're all short ones. Okay, remember this guy? Swedish underwear model? No, that's not really what he is. NATO General Secretary Jens Stoltenberg said Tuesday that member nations have agreed Ukraine will join the alliance in the long term, but that for now, the task facing the international community is to ensure that Ukraine remains a free and sovereign state independent of Russia. Fuck you. Okay? If you want to make them a NATO member nation, just do it by decree. Just surprise me, you Swedish bastard. Go on camera Monday morning and just say, we have decided that we are going to allow Ukraine to be a NATO member nation, and now anything that happens within their nation will be protected by Article 5. Have the guts to see it through. Don't fucking tell them, oh, you'll be in the alliance long term. Give them a date, asshole. Tell them the day that they will begin to be that, because you're just posturing. Am I wrong?
No, you're right.
Like, I don't even want to read the rest of the story. Like, I think I made my point. NATO allies have agreed that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance, but at the same time that it is a long-term perspective. Again, non-committal, right? Stoltenberg told this to reporters at a news conference with Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin in Helsinki. Is that her in that picture? Because, anyway, the issue now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign and independent nation, and therefore we need to support them, he says. Ukrainian President Zelensky has applied for fast-track NATO membership, but there is no prospect of joining the U.S.-led military alliance while Ukraine is in an open conflict with Russia. Really? So now you can't join because you're in a war with them. Is that what he's saying? Dick. Russian President Putin has claimed that Russia began its, quote, special military operation in Ukraine in response to the threat of NATO expanding an alliance to Kyiv, but Western officials have rejected this excuse. Stoltenberg has previously said Ukraine has a right to seek membership in the alliance and that Russia does not have the veto power over what countries can apply. The part that he didn't say out loud, you can seek membership, but we can always just tell you maybe later, because that's what you've been doing since 2014. In response to Russia's aggression, Finland and Sweden reversed their long-standing policies of military neutrality and applied to join NATO in May of 2022. Stoltenberg indicated that the process for those countries to join NATO would soon be complete. Wow, look how fast you did it for those two, Dick.
Because they have money, like I told you.
They have Scania, they have Volvo, they have Saab, the jet manufacturer Saab. But the thing is the big oil producer in that region is Norway, because they just committed a ton of money for Ukraine for this
As
year.
I said, they got money. That's why.
We'll see. Let's see. My message has been for a long time that time has come to finalize the ratification process. The time now to ratify in both Budapest and in Ankara, Stoltenberg says. NATO requires unanimous approval from its 30 existing members to admit new ones. Turkey and Hungary are the only alliance members that have not fully endorsed Sweden and Finland's accession. Most of the opposition comes from Turkey, which wants stronger action, mostly from Sweden, against groups Ankara considers to be terrorists. I don't think you guys are in a position to be making demands now that you will be asking for a lot of disaster relief. Okay? I think the ultimate symbol of good faith is if Sweden and Finland sent rescue and heavy weapon or heavy lifting equipment to Turkey to help, I don't know, save lives because 50,000 people are buried to death in rubble from earthquakes. Wouldn't that be a nice gesture? You think Turkey would say no to the accession after that? Because that would be pretty fucked up. Anyway, Stoltenberg announced that Turkey has agreed to resume talks with Finland and Sweden on joining NATO in Brussels early next month. He added that the Hungarian parliament will debate ratification in the next few days and was hopeful that the vote would favor Finland and Sweden. Finnish Prime Minister Sanna Marin expressed optimism that her country and Ukraine would soon join the alliance. I see that the future of Ukraine is to be part of the European Union and also a member of NATO, Marin says. Finland's 200-member parliament will consider legislation on Wednesday that would allow Finland to join NATO. Just do it already.
Just do it.
Just do it. Moving on. This guy's name is Carl.
Call the Conqueror.
Carl. Department of Defense officials insist that there is no evidence of diversion or misuse of the billions of dollars in American weapons and security assistance that has been sent to Ukraine during its war with Russia. The House Armed Services Committee held a hearing Tuesday questioning defense officials on Ukraine's usage of weapons and the potential that billions in aid from the United States to the war-torn country could be or has been misused or untracked.
They're saying that.
You finally have a working connection.
Sorry, my bull decided to escape.
That.
Mm-hmm.
You mean?
It seems like he knew what was going to happen tomorrow.
You mean? I forgot the name you gave him.
Yeah. Well, you know it. He's from a very infamous
Yevgeny Prigozhin.
Yeah. Yes.
Is tomorrow his D-Day already?
Tomorrow is his D-Day, and this fucker decided to escape. Yes.
Did you ever take a picture of him with the ear tag on?
That's tomorrow.
Oh, you're gonna ear tag him tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay.
I can't do that when I can't do that when he's How can I explain that?
Running rampant everywhere.
Yeah. So he decided that the guy. Okay. We're getting off segue.
It's okay. I needed to take a drink anyway. My throat's killing me.
Okay. So the bull decided to get out because the guys next to my dad's property decided to bring cows and they're on heat. He's like,
God, he just drove that bull nuts.
So he lifted the whole fence.
Mm-hmm.
and he went to Pound Town
He got in there.
on all 18 of them.
What?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes,
by the
sir.
time you showed up on scene, this thing was this Prigozhin was laid out on his back with like a fucking Havana Cuban cigar in his mouth. Like, we're good,
No, well,
we're good.
the thing is there's 25. He could only get to 18. And how I know he got to 18 because he just didn't stop, like he just like let them go, like whatever. And he kept following this one that he wanted to take to Pound Town,
Like, you're
and it didn't
next.
let him. Huh?
She was playing tough.
Yeah, and she didn't let him. So I'm like, okay, how do we get this animal? So I had to take my cows that want to go to Pound Town. And he's like,
You lured him with the other cows.
yes, I did. Because I actually can grab those and like,
So
like
now he's under
little doggies.
control.
Yeah, I can hold one. He's like, oh, and I'm like over here trying to get him, and he's like, but there's more over there. Like, motherfucker, over here.
Damn.
Over here. Over here, for
Yeah.
Georgian. Over here.
He had a pretty good day though.
Oh, he had a great day. It seems like God brought him.
So he got a little bit of Steve McQueen's Great Escape, and then he
Mm-hmm.
turned into like freaking what's that guy's name? Let's just say Lex Steele. Anyway.
But yeah, like so the times that you're trying to bring me into this thing, I was like in between connections.
Oh, because you were outside.
Yeah, because it was connecting to my Wi-Fi,
Got it.
and then I got too far for the Wi-Fi, and they got big into the Wi-Fi.
I got it. All right,
So
we're almost to that
okay, but
segment, by the way.
going back to the what we're talking about, is that article saying that there's known that they're known to have not been misusing the equipment we've been sending them?
Well, I'm still getting there.
Or- Okay.
It's not the equipment. I think it's more the liquid assets, but we'll see.
Okay, because the only reason why I'll say is that the Ukrainians are very good at lists.
Yes.
Very good at lists.
Your papers
Just-
are in order.
I'm being serious. Like they're really good at lists.
Well,
How do you?
is Farida still in the chat? Maybe she can tell us.
Well,
Anyway,
the only historical context I can give is that after the Soviet fall of the Soviet Union, they were the only ones that have the list of stuff and be like, "Hey, you want this?"
hmm.
So that's what I was saying. And everything was accounted for.
All right. Let me get to the rest of the details then. We'll figure this out together. Representative Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, asked defense officials about the importance of tracking the weapons and equipment being sent to Ukraine, asking whether they believe U.S. inspectors should be on the ground to keep track of all the shipments in and out of the country. Responding to Johnson, Colin Kahl, this guy, who serves as Undersecretary for Defense for Policy, said, "First of all, we're not just taking the Ukrainians' words for it. They provide us information on their inventories, their transfer logs. We have provided them handheld scanners. The data gets transmitted directly back to us so we can keep custody. We have shared NATO standard inventory and logistics software, and, of course, we do have a presence at the embassy. We have an Office of Defense Cooperation, and they have done 6 different site visits out of Kyiv. These are daily trips. It is a dangerous place, and we don't have outposts across the country, and they have seen no signs of diversion or that Ukrainians are not following procedure." Representative Mikey Sherrill, Democrat of New Jersey, asked the
Bastard.
officials about the confidence from the Department of Defense that weapons being sent to Ukraine are being used for their intended purposes and not being sold on secondary markets. "What we're not seeing is any evidence of significant diversion," Kahl told Sherrill. "I think our assessment is if some of these systems have been diverted, it's by Russians who have captured things on the battlefield, which always happens. But there's no evidence that the Ukrainians are diverting it to a black market. That's not surprising, given the intensity of the fight and the fact that they are clearly using what we've been providing them and what our allies and partners are providing them to maximum effect. This is an active war zone. There are always going to be things that you don't know are happening or you don't see. But we are not seeing any evidence of systematic diversion of the equipment that the United States has provided." Georgia GOP Representative Andrew Clyde, who does not serve on the committee but was invited for questioning of the DoD officials by Chair Mike Rogers, asked DoD Inspector General Robert Storch whether he has found any instances of sensitive weapons like Stinger missiles being lost or diverted to those not authorized to have them. Noting that he isn't at liberty to discuss certain investigations into the matter, Storch said that the Defense Department has, quote, not substantiated any such instances related to Clyde's question. Pressed on the matter and asked by Clyde whether he would confidently say that, to his knowledge, every sensitive weapon is under control of those who should have them. Storch did not give a clear answer and instead said that the department is laser focused on this issue and engaged in robust oversight to make sure that this is the case. We're doing audits and evaluations that look at weapons from the time they begin at the port while they're transferred throughout as they get to the transshipment points as they go into the country, Storch added. Last week, National Security Council Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby told reporters in a White House briefing that there is no indication that any of the billions of dollars in defense aid the U.S. has sent to Ukraine has been misplaced. Are we having a chat now?
Yep.
Oh my god.
Oh hell yeah, we are.
Alright, hang on a sec. Let me put him up here for a second. Only he gets that kind of chat nappy.
Only he does.
I'll drag him in a second. On a call with reporters, Kirby said that the White House takes responsibility for the funds Congress has appropriated for Ukraine seriously, and that the American people
Really do.
deserve to know their tax dollars are being spent wisely. I think he hit the mute button, so
No,
I
no,
guess that means he's back. There you go.
Yeah, you try to bring him back.
Cool. We have seen no indication to date that there are any of the resources or weapons were provided to Ukraine has been misused, misplaced, stolen, sold on the black market, or captured by the Russians, Kirby said at the time. You know, as I read this, the thing that came to mind for me was the saying that, what was it? The Army fields the weapons, but the Marines make them legendary, right? You've heard that before?
Yeah.
This is like, we have provided the weapons and the Ukrainians have made these weapons legendary. That's his response to how do you know they're not being sold? It's like, because they're destroying tanks at a rate that we have never done before. They're taking these things and they're employing them on a battlefield that is a petri dish of combat, and they're making devastatingly good results with them. That's why we know. It's like, hey, look, we gave them 15 javelins. There's 15 destroyed tanks down there. Pretty sure they used them all. It's like, okay, stands to reason. I'm with you on that.
I go back to what I just said earlier.
They have good
Really
lists.
good at making lists, and they're really good at, making sure that
Things
they're
are
using the
accounted
weapon.
for.
Yes.
I would agree with that.
I didn't
Especially
even
when
read the
you're in a
article.
position of constantly asking for more of them, you want to audit your stuff to the point where you're like, look, we used them all. Look how many people we destroyed. We need more.
Well, this comes back to what I hear a lot of people say. It's like, oh, well, Ukrainians are using all these things. They're probably selling it to get a profit. I'm like, if you probably had your country being invaded
Mhm.
and you need to defend yourself, I think the last thing you want to do, at least, mind you, there's outliers everywhere, to sell things that could very well be used to defend your homeland.
Yeah. Okay, we made it to Wednesday, March 1st. We're finally in this month. We're deep into this week. We're at day 371. Let's get through these quickly because I want to play War Game now. The presidents of China and Belarus joined Wednesday in urging a ceasefire and negotiations to bring about a political settlement to the Ukraine conflict. Now, remember, this is a communist nation and a Russian political lapdog urging a ceasefire and negotiations from the side that has been on the defensive. What the fuck? The joint call came in a meeting in Beijing between Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a close ally of Russia, and his Chinese communist counterpart Xi Jinping. That amounted to an endorsement of a Chinese 12-point peace proposal issued Friday that calls for the territorial integrity of all countries to be respected. The proposal does not say what would happen to the regions Russia has occupied since the invasion or gave details on how the peace process should proceed, and has failed to gain any support. The core of China's stance is to call for peace and encourage talks, and for the legitimate security concerns of all countries to be respected, she was quoted as saying by Chinese state broadcaster CCTV. Chinese Communist TV? Oh. In a clear reference to the U.S. and its allies, he added, relevant countries should stop politicizing and using the world economy as their tool, and take measures that truly advance a ceasefire, and stop to war and resolve the crisis peacefully. Belarus fully agrees with and supports China's position and proposals on a political solution to the Ukrainian crisis, which is of great significance to resolving the crisis. CCTV quoted Lukashenko as saying, China has long had a close relationship with Lukashenko, and following their talks, the two leaders oversaw the signing of a raft of cooperation agreements in areas ranging from agriculture to customs enforcement and sports. However, the Belarusian leader's trip also illustrates the depth of Beijing's ties to Russian leader Vladimir Putin and his allies. China says that it is a neutral party in the conflict and has maintained contacts with the governments of Ukrainian President Zelensky, who has cautiously welcomed Beijing's involvement, but said success would depend on actions, not words. Despite that, China says it has no limits friendship with Russia and has refused to criticize Moscow's invasion, or even to refer to it as such. It has accused the U.S. and NATO of provoking the conflict and of fanning the flames by providing Ukraine with defensive arms, while also condemning sanctions leveled against Russia and entities seen as aiding its military effort, including Chinese companies. China has maintained what it calls normal trade relations with Russia, and U.S. officials have warned recently that it's considering sending military assistance to Moscow, which is running increasingly short on ammunition and other war materiel. Beijing has called the U.S. allegations a smear campaign and said it's committed to promoting peace talks. Lukashenko's government has strongly backed Moscow and allowed Belarus's territory to be used as a staging ground for the initial invasion of Ukraine a year ago. Russia has maintained a contingent of troops and weapons in Belarus, and the two neighbors and allies conducted joint military drills.
You don't say.
Yeah. The stance left Lukashenko even more isolated in Europe, where his country faces sanctions from the European Union over both its role in the war and his repression of domestic opposition. Lukashenko has been Belarus's only president since the position was created in 1984. He brutally suppressed 2020 protests over his disputed re-election in a vote that the opposition in Western countries regarded as fraud. Duh. Allegedly. Sorry, I forgot to
Allegedly.
use that word. That's like the golden word of this Discord server. It's like, I don't know, what was that one movie? Hot Fuzz? And it was like the catchphrase in that movie was the greater good.
The greater
Yeah,
good.
this is allegedly. All right, we're almost done, I promise. I'm trying to get through these really quickly. This is proof that building a border wall works, by the way. Finland has begun construction of a 124-mile barrier fence on its eastern border with Russia, enacting a security plan developed after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an invasion of neighboring Ukraine. The Finnish border guards said that the fence will be at least 10 feet tall, with barbed wire and surveillance equipment installed on top. It will not span the entire border with Russia, but will be built in riskier areas, such as border crossing points and their adjacent areas. Of all European countries, Finland shares the longest land border with Russia, stretching 832 miles.
So they're building a Maginot Line.
Yeah. Currently, A simple wooden fence separating forested areas marks the boundary between Finland and Russia. The Finnish government greenlit the border fence project in June in response to a rise in illegal immigration from Russia as Russians fled the country to avoid being conscripted to fight in Ukraine. Take notes,
There it is.
Biden. This is how you solve this problem. Let's see, where did I leave off before I went on my rant? When finished, the new border fence will cover roughly 15% of the border with Russia and will mainly be used to slow and direct illegal immigrant traffic to areas where border officials can manage the flow of people. You know what else funnels people and manages the flow of people? Minefields. They're very effective. Maybe you should try that sometime. It
He can't do that.
It worked in Saudi Arabia. Just saying. They fenced and mined their border with Iraq. Fun fact. Construction began with the forest clearance at the Pelkola border crossing point in Imatra on February 28, 2023, and will continue through the spring. This portion of the fence is a pilot to test the viability of a larger project, which is estimated to cost in the hundreds of millions of euros, according to the border guard. A road will be built along the fence for the movement and maintenance of border patrols. The fence will be equipped with night vision cameras, lights, loudspeakers, and other things in certain areas. Probably thermal sensors. Or game cameras, right? Road and fence installation is expected to begin in March, followed by construction of a technical surveillance system. The pilot project is expected to be completed by the end of June. An additional 328-yard fence will be built in the Amola garrison area during the program's pilot phase. It will be used as a training ground for the Border and Coast Guard Academy and will also serve as a test area for new surveillance technology. Sorry, I'm kind of distracted because I can feel puppies moving around in my dog's belly. As the pilot program moves forward, the Finnish border guard is planning to construct about 44 miles of additional fencing in other important target areas, with construction to take place between 2023 and 2025. A 34-mile barrier will be constructed in southeast Finland, about 4 miles more in North Karelia, and 3 miles in Kainuu and Lapland. Finland also took another step towards joining NATO as the country's parliament overwhelmingly ratified a resolution to join the military alliance. The final vote was 184 to 7, according to the German news agency DW. Both Finland and Sweden reversed their long-standing positions of neutrality and applied for NATO membership last year after Russia made their invasion into Ukraine.
Those 7 were Russian sympathizers.
Probably. The descendants of Sumo Haya probably took them out very quietly afterwards.
Possibly.
Hopefully. Allegedly. Let's see. Their acceptance into the alliance is contingent to the approval of Hungary and Turkey, because they changed their name, with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan obstructing the process mainly because of Sweden's support for a Kurdish organization he considers to be a terrorist group. We do not have... Well, what if we, the United States, considered Russia a terrorist group? Then what would happen? Just saying. We do not have relatively a major problem with respect to Finland, but we are always underlining that Sweden should take concrete steps. Turkish Foreign Minister Mevlut Cavusoglu said in February. NATO Secretary Jens Stoltenberg has expressed openness to a split approval for Finland and Sweden if the differences between Ankara and Stockholm cannot be resolved. The main question is not whether Finland and Sweden are ratified together, Stoltenberg says. The main question is that they are both ratified as full members as soon as possible. That's contradictory, because he just said, well, we can do one without the other if we have to. How non-committal. But the guy is non-committal, because he's a dick.
He is the epitome of non-committal.
Yeah. Moving on. Another short story. President Biden on Wednesday issued a continuation of a previous executive order, oh, you're going to love this one, that declared a national emergency in the U.S. related to the year-long conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You heard me right. He's going to extend national emergency orders because, COVID's over, right? So he needs the next excuse. This Executive Order 13660. So it's not Order 66. It's Executive
It's
Order.
close.
I
It's
know.
close.
It's Executive Order 13660.
Sadness. It would have been great if it was Order 66.
Yeah, this is 13660. Was initially signed by former President Barack Obama in 2014 after Russia's
There it is.
Yeah, now you get the link, right? After Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine, but it was expanded over the years with additional executive orders as the conflict between the two states intensified and culminated into the invasion launched by Russia last year. The orders include certain sanctions related to Russia's actions in Ukraine with respect to U.S. interests. In February 22, just days before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, Biden issued another executive order that expanded the, quote, national emergency scope of the previous orders that were set to expire on March 6th. The continuation Biden issued Wednesday will extend the orders for an additional year. The actions and policies addressed in these executive orders continue to pose an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security and foreign policy of the United States, the White House said in a press release announcing the continuation. Threat to national security and foreign policy. How about the fact that your border czar still hasn't done her fucking job? How about the fact that we are still getting hundreds of thousands of illegal criminal invaders across the border every month? How about that? What about that national security threat? Does that not register to this guy?
No.
No. Okay. Just checking. Just checking. For this reason, the national emergency declared in the Executive Order 13660, which was expanded in scope in Executive Order 13661 and 13662 and Executive Order 14,065. A lot of 60s. And under which additional steps were taken in an Executive Order 13685 and 13849 must continue in effect beyond March 6 of 23, Biden wrote. It's a lot of executive orders. Therefore, in accordance with Section 202D of the National Emergencies Act, that is number 50 U.S. Code 1622 subsection D, if you're wondering. I'm continuing for 1 year the national emergency declared in Executive Order 13660, he added. The continuation comes as the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has intensified in the recent weeks, with Russian forces, which occupy much of eastern and southern portions of Ukraine, attempting to advance at multiple points along hundreds of miles of the front line. Allegedly. Anyway, we're moving on to Thursday, because I need to wrap this up so we can war game. This guy's name. I'm going to have a little hard time pronouncing this one. Estonia has criticized NATO allies for not doing enough to continue supporting Ukraine as Russia's invasion drags on past the 1 year mark.
Apparently, Estonia found their balls.
Yes, I like this. And it also raised concerns that the UN may not be able to fulfill its duty in holding those in power responsible for alleged war crimes. Members have not done enough, Estonian Foreign Minister Urmas Reinsalu was quoted as saying in his exclusive interview. This is my comprehensive assessment. The Western camp has supported weapons aid given around 50 billion euros approximately, and this is far from being satisfying, Reinsalu added. If we want to invest in Ukrainian victory, not only to invest in Ukraine, that they can survive and not lose, we have to change the paradigm of our support. Estonia has remained a vocal supporter of Ukraine since the start of the invasion, and it was one of the first countries, along with Latvia and Slovakia, to accuse Russia of war crimes and insist on a tribunal to examine the issue and hold Putin personally accountable.
They would know about Russian war crimes.
Reinsalu cited Ukrainian authorities in reference to an alleged 60,000 crimes, with more on the rise, including crimes against humanity, which are committed on the ground by his own officers, by soldiers and civilians, and so on. Allegedly. Uh, I fully believe that Putin and his near accomplices should be taken into responsibility of that crime, Ryan Salute had said. I think they should be taken into the gas chambers, but whatever. This is not just the usual war. No, which is appropriate to qualify as a genocide because of Russian intent. And if you look at Putin's speeches and articles on Ukraine and Russia and so on, he is denying the existence of the Ukrainian nation as a cultural or political unit, he continues. Therefore, we see also that there is a vast set of crimes which are not targeted towards military or human beings as Ukraine, but is towards Ukraine as an entity. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, knee pads, on February 18th, announced during a speech at the Munich Security Conference that the United States has determined that the Russian military is committing crimes against humanity in its invasion of Ukraine. From the starting days of this unprovoked war, we have witnessed Russian forces engage in horrendous atrocities and war crimes. Their actions are an assault on our common values, an attack on our common humanity. Ryan Salou reiterated the call for a tribunal to examine Russia's crimes of aggression, but he raised concerns that a crisis in the UN has muddied its role and ability to properly help Ukraine since Russia holds a permanent seat on the Security Council. That aggressor itself has a veto power over these decisions, and so the way to overcome it is truly by the General Assembly, Ryan Salou says, explaining that he believes the General Assembly, with a mandate in cooperation with the Security General, can create the tribunal and bypass Russia's veto power. But Ryan Salou remains concerned that NATO allies are not doing enough to help Ukraine achieve victory. The U.S., on the 1 year of the anniversary of the war, announced its additional $2 billion in military aid to Ukraine in the form of laser-guided rockets, drones, ammo, and more, along with new sanctions against Russia's economy. Other countries, such as Poland, have looked to provide tanks, something the U.S. said it would also consider, but has recently signaled might not even happen, with the Army determining that shipments might not happen until the end of the year, as there remain a lot of details that still need to be worked out. Like, where the fuck are we going to come up with 31 tanks? We don't have them. That's embarrassing. Ryan Salou urged NATO allies to contribute more not just to the Ukraine defense, but to also NATO itself as the alliance looks to expand. Finland and Sweden applied for membership due to concerns of Russia's invasion, and Ukraine has irreparably shifted the international security landscape. But some existing members do not supply the necessary 2% of GDP to defense spending as stipulated. Estonia, which joined NATO in March of 2004, has hit that mark every year since 2014, investing as much as 2.4% in 2020, though the number dropped to 2.2% in 2021, according to data from the World Bank. Ryan Salou says that Estonia will look to increase spending to 3% starting next year, along with a call for all NATO allies to do the same, as 2% is not enough. We are making, before the Vilnius summit, the call to that all the NATO allies should contribute their very fair share to defense, and 2% is not enough. To raise the minimum of defense expenditure from GDP to the 2.5% level, Ryan Salou said, reiterating the stance revealed in early February. We are actively now looking to renew all of our regional defense plans, and surely we would very much welcome to see a soon and smooth...
Don't call me Shirley. Sorry.
I know that quote. The smooth ratification of Finnish, Swedish secession treaty to join later, he added, stressing that it will make a difference for our security. Of course I'm serious. And don't call me Shirley. Okay. This person here is... The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs deflected criticism from the U.S. State Department Thursday, comparing the U.S. intervention in Taiwan to the conflict in Ukraine. I told you, second front starting to open up. There's that story. Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning, bang ding ow, was asked Thursday for response to Secretary of State Antony Blinken's recent criticism of the Chinese peace plan for Ukraine. China can't have it both ways when it comes to the Russian aggression in Ukraine, Blinken said on March 1st. It can't be putting forward peace proposals on one hand while actively feeding the flames and fire of war that Russia has started with the other. Mao dismissed Blinken's remark, calling the accusations hypocritical as the U.S. continues to fund the Ukrainian military to repel Russian invading forces. How dare you help the defenders, right? That's what she's saying.
Yep.
The U.S. has been pouring lethal weapons into the battlefield in Ukraine, fanning up the flames and spreading disinformation. We're firmly against that. Well, I'm firmly against an idiot who can't even realize that we've just been helping the defense of a nation that's being invaded. The spokeswoman went on to cite the Taiwan issue as an example of the U.S. disregarding national sovereignty. Funny, I thought Taiwan was nationally sovereign territory.
Nope.
Not in their eyes. Let's see. The U.S. keeps saying that territorial sovereignty must be respected, but on the Taiwan question, the U.S. has been walking on the edge and pushing the envelope, Mao said. The U.S. has broken its own political commitments and has been selling sophisticated weapons to China's Taiwan region. That's right, we're selling them weapons. Taiwan, also known as the Republic of China, is an island off the coast of the mainland. Taiwan has long declared itself independent of the People's Republic of China and has claimed continuation of governance from the pre-revolutionary Chinese state. The People's Republic of China, ruled by the Communist Party, has long claimed sovereignty over Taiwan and the strait, the relatively narrow strip of ocean between the island of Taiwan and the Chinese mainland. The United States does not have official relations with Taiwan, but has been stepping up engagement with the island as China seeks to isolate it from global institutions. Mao continued, the U.S. needs to reflect on itself, stop sowing confusion, stop trying to mislead the world, and stop making presumptions about others based on the U.S.'s own behavior. The U.S. needs to step up to its responsibility and help de-escalate tensions, to promote dialogue and stop pointing fingers and discrediting other countries. The U.S. is preparing to send 200 troops to Taiwan for training, quote, training, allegedly. Amid the rising tension, amid the rising tensions, a U.S. official familiar with the planning confirmed last week. Listen, honey, you're saying that we need to reflect on ourselves and stop sowing confusion and stop trying to mislead the world. Maybe China needs to reflect on itself that we give a fuck what it thinks. Or
Well,
better yet, maybe
she's saying this because she threw the short straw in China because she didn't have enough social credits.
But see, the thing is maybe they should reflect on themselves. Maybe they should stop sowing confusion. Because the last time I checked, Taiwan didn't ask us, hey, could y'all mind your own business? We can deal with this ourselves. They didn't say that, did they?
No, they know that they
They
can't
said,
beat
yo,
mainland.
we're facing annihilation here. Could you maybe help us out? And so we did, because we have always been the police of the world. Because that's why we're a global superpower. Because we just live to stick our nose in everyone's business. It's just what we do. We call it diplomacy. Anyway, moving on.
Oh no, yeah, but we have to do diplomacy with our guns out, so we can call it gunboat diplomacy.
Peace through strength.
Yes.
Blinken and the lapdog. Secretary of State Antony Blinken ran into his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lapdog, for the first time since Russian President Putin launched his invasion in Ukraine over a year ago. Top diplomats were said to have chatted for no more than 10 minutes on the sidelines of the G20 conference in India, which the U.S. has previously looked to ban Moscow from. During the brief encounter, Blinken reiterated 3 top priorities to the U.S., which firstly included Russia re-entering the New START treaty to bring Washington and Moscow back under a joint nuclear agreement after Putin suspended the treaty last week. A senior State Department official was quoted as saying, sorry, I forgot that part. Additionally, the secretary urged Lavrov, I said his real name sometimes, to review a proposal the U.S. sent regarding former Marine Paul Whelan. Finally, that name came back into the news. who has been wrongfully detained in Russia since 2018. Lastly, Blinken reiterated the U.S.'s commitment to Ukraine and called on Russia to end the war and respect Ukraine's internationally recognized borders as detailed under the UN, which would include the complete Russian withdrawal from Crimea, a move Russia is unlikely to take. State Department official did not go into detail on Lapdog's comments, but said that the U.S. remains hopeful that Moscow will reverse its course in Ukraine, or else. I put that last part in. According to the Indian Foreign Minister, Subramanyam Jaishankar, I think I got that right, the G20 could not issue a joint statement on the war in Ukraine, but said that the differences between nations standing on the war could not be reconciled, first reported by the BBC. We tried, but the gap between the countries was too much, he asked. The U.S. reportedly said the talks had been marred by Russia's unprovoked and unjustified war, while Russia in turn accused the West of blackmail and threats. We are meeting at a time of deep global divisions, Indian PM Narendra Modi reportedly said when opening the talks. After years of progress, we are at risk today of moving back on the Sustainable Development Goals. Many developing countries are struggling with unsustainable debts while trying to ensure food and energy security, he added. The G20, an economic cooperative between 20 nations, is made up of the world's top economies, which also includes nations like China, France, Germany, the UK, Indonesia, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa. China. So he was saying that the Indian Foreign Ministry said that he couldn't issue a joint statement because we were too far apart and he couldn't bring the nations together, right? There's 20 nations here in this thing. It's India. Nothing brings 20 nations together faster than tandoori and curry that sends them all to the bathroom and springing leaks like the Exxon Valdez. They'd all be moaning and groaning together in front of their stalls.
No. You see, that makes them leave the table, not
yeah,
come
but
to the
that
table.
brings them all together at the toilet.
Yeah, but the problem is
they're all gonna wish they were dead. Like, oh god, I ate the metal crusty. Oh, I'm shitting lava. My dogs are looking at me like, what the fuck?
Curry is not that great.
Anyway, no, I love it, dude. There's like 65,000 different ones. I intend to eat them all.
Oh boy, that's rough.
Hell yeah. Moving on. We got to get through this because I've got 3 stories left. And no, I got 2 stories left. 3 stories.
I don't think I'm going to be awake for commentary.
They're all short. European Union officials and countries from the 27-nation bloc are discussing plans to dedicate an extra €1 billion, as well as setting up a joint procurement scheme to speed up the delivery of howitzer artillery rounds that Ukraine says are crucial to countering Russian forces. With Ukraine facing shortages of ammunition to fight Russia, the idea of setting up a plan similar to the one devised using the coronavirus pandemic to buy vaccines was first brought to the table last month by Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. So you're right. Estonia, Latvia, they're all starting to step up, which is cool.
Well, they've been quiet for the last 30 years, and now they're speaking up because Russia can't go after them right now because they're too busy with Ukraine.
It's a good move. Why are you digging in my bed? Anyway. According to the EU official with direct knowledge of the project, who briefed reporters Thursday, the priority now is to guarantee the swift delivery to Ukrainian armed forces of 155mm artillery shells. The official was not authorized to speak publicly because the plan is still being finalized. To fund the project, member states would need to use an additional €1 billion after they already agreed in December to top up the European Peace Facility by a further €2 billion, with a possibility of an additional $3.5 billion. The EU will encourage third countries to join the fund, and the official says, we're in discussions with the Norwegians with potential interest from Canadians. In parallel, the European Defense Agency would aggregate demands from member states to restock and lead a fast-track procedure for direct negotiations with industrial providers of ammunition in Europe. Just contact Federal. Anyway, according to the official, A total of 12 companies in 9 member states are producing 155mm ammunition. The European Commission, the EU's executive arm, will incentivize them to ramp up production with guarantees of long-term demand, making the project interesting for them, officials says. Hey, European Commission, EU's arm, how about you incentivize the American primer and powder industries to ramp up production with guarantees of just domestic long-term demand? Because we've been fucking short for like the last 8 years. That'd be great. Rant over. According to various estimates, Ukraine is firing 6,000 to 7,000 artillery shells per day, around a third of Russia's total 1 year into the war. The plan will be discussed by EU defense ministers next week before foreign and defense ministers further look at it during a meeting on March 20th. Leaders could then rubber stamp it during a summit in Brussels on March 23rd. You know, I just read that. 6,000 to 7,000 shells per day, right? Do you remember that movie 1917 that came out a couple years ago? It was the World War I movie that was shot as one continuous scene, and they went through that bunker that got caved in, and when they got to the other side, they were standing in like a giant pit full of used artillery shells. That's what Ukraine must look like right now. Like just one giant pile of empty shells. Good God. My dad used to make lamps out of those, by the way. Moving on. See, until we're getting through this quick. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said Thursday that the 619 million sales of munitions to Taiwan will not impact weapons flowing to Ukraine. Oh, really? What happened to we're running out of shit? Allegedly.
Allegedly.
A reporter had asked Kirby whether the U.S. could fulfill the package given that the U.S. defense industry is already struggling to fulfill munitions requests for Ukraine. Kirby said that the arms sales to Taiwan announced Wednesday ensure that the island nation has sufficient self-defense capabilities. As for the impact on it, as for the impact of it on what we're providing to Ukraine, there won't be. Completely different systems, Kirby said. The NSC spokesman said munitions to Ukraine were being carried out largely through Presidential Drawdown Authority, which allows the Pentagon to take weapons from its own stocks and quickly ship them to Ukraine. So it's a completely different process, different systems altogether. Kirby's a former retired admiral, by the way, so he's not like just joke you public. The State's Department's approved sale of missiles to be used with F-16s and other equipment includes AGM-88s, anti-radiation missiles, air-to-air missiles, and launchers. The approved sales come as tensions between mainland China and the U.S. are at their highest level in years over American support for the self-governed island, including visits by high-ranking politicians and a host of other issues, including the suspected Chinese spy balloon that traversed the U.S. before being shot down over South Carolina last month. China considers Taiwan part of its territory to be brought under its control, by force if necessary, and it has been stepping up its military and diplomatic harassment. The sides split amid civil war in 1949, and China's authoritarian Communist Party has never held sway over the island. The United States is Taiwan's leading supplier of military equipment, and China has objected to past sales with sanctions and other actions. Once arms sales are approved, delivering them can take years, and China has cited consistent delays in receiving weapons that it had already purchased. Alright, so the bearded guy asked me, what's the chance that Russia might go 1935 Germany?
33.
35? 30? Are you talking about... Wait, is it 35 or 39?
Lost. What was he talking about?
He's asking
39
what's
is
the
when they
chance
started
that...
the war.
Right, so he's like, what's the chance that
Going to
Russia
war?
might go 1935 Germany? You're going to have to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm a little bit lost.
Like, there are certain key dates in Germany's ascension into World War II. Some of them go back as far as the beer hall push in, like, 1925 and 29. 35 kind of eludes me a little bit, because the extended holiday in Poland was 39. The extended holiday in France was 40, I think? Right? 40? The Battle of Britain, I believe, was 41. Right? You can stop me at any time if I'm wrong. Anyway, I gotta turn the fan off.
I Google it because I'm kind of lost.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you come up with it by the next segment, then we'll go over it. Germany invaded
When I
Poland.
when I
Yeah,
when I put up,
I thought Germany invaded Poland in 39.
hmm, Germany invaded Poland. Germany invaded Poland in 1939.
Okay. See, I was like, I was
September
doubting
1st,
myself.
1939. But when I put 1935 Germany, it takes me to this Holocaust encyclopedia.
HVS says something about the Spanish Civil War. Guernica?
He said
That's
Germany, right?
yeah. Sudetenland. Okay.
Hmm, I'm still
I'm
kind of
still
lost.
trying to draw. Okay, I'm bearded guy. Write out what you're saying. Spell it out for me a little bit, and
Well,
we'll go over it.
33
Berlin riots. There was a famous Berlin riots in 1935.
Right. He's
30
asking what's the chance that Russia might do something. So I'm curious what he's driving at, because I
Yeah.
mean we can
Okay.
chew it over, sure, because we're about
Yeah.
to lead into our war game. I only got the last story, and then we're gonna go straight to that.
Well, 33
Real
the
quick,
mean
remind me about the question where you can. Yeah.
Hmm. Oh, he was just asking, what's the chance that Russia might go 1935 Germany? I'm like, I don't
Okay.
know.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
I'm gonna read the last
Was-
story, and then I'm gonna spell out the war game, and then if this can be tied into it, we'll do both. Because I'm almost done. We're good. So I already put up the tank porn up there. Germany wants to buy mothballed Leopard 2 tanks from Switzerland to replace tanks that Berlin and its Western allies are sending to Ukraine. The Swiss government said this on Friday. Swiss Defense Ministry said that Germany's defense and economy ministers, wrote on February 23rd to Swiss Defense Minister Viola Amherd, setting out German manufacturer Rheinmetall's interest in buying Leopard 2 tanks that the Swiss army doesn't plan to put back into service. They're just mothballed. They assured Amherd that the tanks, if bought, wouldn't be sent to Ukraine and would be used by Germany or its NATO and European partners to backfill the gaps in their own stocks created by their donations of their current tanks to Kyiv, and to improve the availability of replacement parts. That's an issue because Switzerland has a long tradition of neutrality. Germany so far has been unable to persuade the Swiss to provide supplies from their stockpiles of ammunition for Gepard self-propelled anti-aircraft guns that Berlin provided to Ukraine. The ministry, in an emailed response to a query after Swiss Daily Blick reported on their quest, didn't specify how many tanks Germany would like to buy. Switzerland has 230 German-made Leopard 2 tanks. This is a small country. It's got 230 tanks, 96 of which are currently not in operation, according to German news agency DPA. So they have a spy, allegedly.
allegedly.
Amherd this week responded to the German government that any sale would require a decision by the Swiss parliament to declare the tanks officially removed from service, and that while there are discussions in parliament, no such decision has been made. Her ministry said that the army has determined that in principle it would be possible to do without a limited number of battle tanks. Germany is providing 18 of its own military's Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, and they're expected to be delivered later this month. Together with tanks provided by Sweden and Portugal, Sweden is providing the Stridsvagn 120, which is a super hopped up version of the Leopard 2A6, I think. It's a 2A5 with armor thicker than the 2A6. It has the grenade launchers from a French Leclerc and a better guidance and targeting system that was domestically produced. So it's pretty cool, actually. They out-Israeled Israel in a way. And Portugal. They will make up a battalion. Poland and other countries are providing Leopard 2 tanks. Germany's defense minister has pushed for the tanks to be replaced as quickly as possible. The German Defense Ministry spokesman Arnie Kolatz confirmed Germany's interest in the tanks from Switzerland, but said that there had been no discussion yet of how many would be involved. Asked whether similar queries were made to other countries, Kolatz replied, "We're in constant contact and with good talks with many partners," but he could not elaborate. Now, here's something funny. If Germany wants to buy back the tanks they sold to Switzerland, Switzerland's hesitant to do so because they're like, we're a neutral nation. And they're like, well, yeah, but you're selling them to us. Yeah, but we're a neutral nation. It's like,
Yeah, but you're
but
selling
you're
them back to
selling
us
them
because
back
we
to
made
us.
them.
We sold them to you. But we're a neutral nation. So it's like, Germany has a really long-standing history of dealing with difficult nations like this by simply annexing them. You know, like Czechoslovakia in 1938. Just a thought. No,
Well,
1935 actually.
well,
Just a thought.
Germany needs to take stance.
That's why HVS was talking
We
about the
need to buy
Sudetenland.
these. We need to buy these back because we need to fill out the backlog that we already have. And we don't have enough
Yes, that was
resources to build more
exactly.
in the meantime.
Well, I don't know
By
if
the
it's the
way,
resources to
build
build
those
more, it's the time.
So you're not selling them to us to fund somebody else. You're selling us to this so we can fix them and fill the backlog.
Yeah, the thing
They
is
should
it's easier for them to refurb their disabled ones than it is to build brand new ones. It'd take too long.
Yeah, it'll take too long, and
And
that's all they need to say.
truth be
And
told, they don't have the tooling anymore.
yeah,
They're building 2A7s now, and they have a new one past that. It's called like the 2A7X or something like that.
Mhm.
So the ones that they want to buy back from Switzerland, they're probably 2A5s or 2A6s, and yeah, they just want to refurb those just to get them back in inventory because if you're not using them and they're just mothballed and broken, we could use the parts, you know. It'd be a pretty good idea. In Switzerland, like you said, you're neutral. You don't need fucking 230 of them for a neutral nation.
technically you're a mountain nation. What do you need tanks for?
Uh, overlanding. I know the answer to that one. Okay, so I think we sort of touched on all that. I get the Spanish
Yeah.
Civil War, or I get the Sudetenland reference now that HVS was talking about because I was like, you know what, he might be right, but it was not the Russia thing. It was Germany annexing Switzerland just to seize the tanks, because you know they did it to the Czechs, and then they were building PZ-35s, which was just the Czechoslovakian Skoda 35, and then later on the 38. So there was that.
There was that.
Anyway, okay, so finally we finished the stories, and now we finally get to play this. I got a picture for it. Boom. World War III. Yep. Okay, so there's 4 of us here, and there should have been more than 4 of us here, but, you know, people can't fucking show up anymore. So, and besides, they're so late now, I don't want to throw them in. So this is the game I'm talking about. It's not really a game. This is a big what if. And if you guys in the audience want to play the game, you can type it out and I'll read it out and we'll mull it over. And I'll try not to make this take too long because we're pushing 3 hours. So let's just do this quickly, okay? I posed this question a couple weeks back and I thought this deserves some expanding thought. We should talk about this a bit. Today is Friday. Let's just assume that let's just assume that even a dictator will take a weekend off, okay? So let's just say that you woke up Monday morning, 7 a.m. Monday morning. Sort of like, imagine you woke up like the day 9/11 happened. And I know Mike and I know Scott and I think Jaime. I asked the same questions. I said, where were you when 9/11 happened? And almost every person can tell me exactly what they were doing or where they were at. Me, I was just waking up because I had later classes in college in the day so I could sleep in. And I had walked out to my kitchen and my living room, and my mom was standing in front of my living room TV with her mouth dropped open, just pointing at the screen. And I saw it, and I thought, what the hell are you watching? What movie is this? And she's like, that is happening right now in New York. And then my phone blew up because my friend who is FDNY called and told me, you're not going to believe what's going on. I'm standing a block away and there's dust everywhere. So I thought, Jesus Christ, this is real, right?
Mm-hmm.
So imagine we wake up Monday morning, which would be March 6th. 7 a.m., you're getting up, you're bleary-eyed, maybe you're hungover, maybe you're an early riser. I'm not. You're reaching for your coffee and you turn on the TV, and the first thing you see is the world is now at war. This has now spilled out of just Russia and Ukraine. Okay? And there are several different ways this could have started. For instance, China could have gone ahead and declared war on Taiwan and the United States. Or, for instance, um, you could say something like Belarus has declared war and has joined the hostilities. Or you could say something like the Chechens, because of Kadyrov, has declared war on, I don't know, Estonia, just something like that, right? Like something would happen, and now the world has had to get involved, because what we have talked about for weeks and months was we were standing here saying that most world wars start with a small nation in kind of a dark corner of the world that nobody really pays attention to. Something happens, everyone criticizes it. Nations from all over the world start choosing sides and arming, each other, and then you have a global conflict. Well, that's kind of what we're seeing right now. A nation has invaded Ukraine, which was kind of, I'm not saying they're not a do nothing or a dark country. I'm just saying that that was not the country that you were probably going to hear about in terms of world war. It was just another nation, just like Yugoslavia was another nation when was it Franz Ferdinand, right? When he was assassinated? Archduke Ferdinand. Archduke
Arch,
Ferdinand. When he was assassinated.
Archduke
It
Franz
was,
Ferdinand.
yeah, it was like nobody thought Yugoslavia would be the point where it all kicked off. But guess what? Shit happens, right? Or Germany decides to take an extended holiday in Poland. You know what I mean? It's like, okay, so let's say you woke up Monday and that's
Actually,
what
it
you're
wasn't
hearing.
France. It was France.
Fucking split hairs, man. Anyway. Oh, he heard my dogs barking. Holy shit. Sorry about that.
Yeah, your dogs were,
They
barking
were
up a
in the
storm.
other side of the house. That's what's messed up. All my girls are asleep. One's in my lap. Anyway, point is, you wake up to this, and what I'm going to ask each panelist is I want you to pick a nation that's not Ukraine or Russia. So I'm going to let you pick China if you want. But pick a nation, pick their service or branch or military or whatever, pick what they're doing and where they're doing it, and then answer the question of what impact would that have on either Ukraine or Russia. Okay? This is day one of World War III. Okay? I'll start because this will get the ball rolling. You'll see what I mean. If I woke up to that, I would wake up to the news that Belarus has decided to join the fray and has decided to invade Ukraine from the north to Kyiv, right? They make a deal with the Russians. They take their tank battalions and their infantry, and I guess their limited air forces, to provide top cover, and they all collectively push in. They have a united battlefront pushing down to Kyiv. So now Zelensky has to react to this, because right now most of his forces are focused on the east, while his navy is sort of paying attention to preserving Odessa in the southwest, and he doesn't really have to worry about his far western flank because it's his neighbor Poland, right? So let's say this happens. Belarus steps in. The nation I'm choosing to do something about this is Poland. Okay? So what I would think would happen is Poland, instead of going into Ukraine to help the Ukrainians defend against Belarusians, because it would be kind of hard to know friend from foe, right? Because, I mean, common-ish language, common-ish looks, maybe military uniforms and insignias, okay. But that would be kind of a difficult thing to do. Instead of trying to do it in Ukraine to stop the Belarusians from attacking. Because think about what would happen if Belarus comes in. Russia just gets to take a breather now because they have a second front that they don't have to occupy themselves, right? Putin gets a breather. So it's like, how do you stop that extra convenience for Russia? This is what I
Yes,
think would happen.
yes, but knowing Belarus, it might be the only force they've got, and taking it into another country like Ukraine could be leaving themselves open and vulnerable.
Ah, you see? Okay, so you're playing exactly into
And
my scenario. So
and,
this is the
and
deal. This is the
yeah,
deal. I don't think Poland would push into Ukraine to help. I don't.
no,
I think what Poland would do, because they hold just about everything in the NATO inventory. They have Leopard tanks, they have Challenger tanks, they have Abrams tanks, they have freaking T-72s and T-90s, right? They've got a lot of stuff. I would suggest that Poland pushes into Belarus. Like you said, they try to push into Ukraine, they're pushing forward, and all of a sudden they get news from their wives and their mistresses and their whatevers. Hey, dude, the freaking Poles just invaded our country. What did the Belarusian military do? Oh shit. We were in
oh
an
shit,
attack.
we're fighting in Ukraine. We
We're
can't get
fighting
back
in
there.
Ukraine. So what do? They have to turn around and go back home to defend their own country now, right? So Poland deals, this is the thing about who does this help, who does this hurt? Poland helps Ukraine by taking Belarus off the board as a Russian military asset. You see what I did?
Okay, okay. Let me expand on this further.
Well, this is my scenario. That's what I'm trying to say. Is like, how
Hurry
did
up.
this affect it? How does this affect it? Right? They help Ukraine by taking away Russia's bro, essentially, right? So
Right.
now Russia is like, oh cool, we got Belarus help. What do you mean Belarus is on the retreat? Well, because the Poles just invaded Belarus. So now they have to go back to the defense of their own homeland. So Russia's like, well shit, now we're still on our own. That's my scenario. Now it helps the Ukrainians. Now the Ukrainians don't have to split their forces on their defensive anymore because all the Belarusians had to do is turn around and go home now. So that front became null again, which means Zelensky can stay focused on the east. And now the Russians are like, fuck. Not only can we not move assets back into Belarus because now we don't know how many Poles are there that are going to intercept anything we send there, but now we don't have anybody to help us up there. So now that part of the
Mhm.
map has just become blocked off to him. So that means he only has the east left to push. That's my scenario.
All right. I want to expand upon your scenario. Okay.
But you had your own. I heard you.
Well,
You told me about
well,
it earlier.
I wasn't done yet. All right. You think you're going there,
Go ahead.
but look at it this way. Okay. Sure. The Polish could go into Belarus to keep them there,
Okay.
but you're not thinking fourth dimensionally, because I would argue that the Poles would go into the Ukraine to engage Belarusian and Russian forces. Period, because they hate the Russians. One, two. Look at the other border countries. Okay, Lithuania and Latvia, also NATO nations,
Mm-hmm.
also don't like Russia lately, as their friend Estonia has been very vocal lately.
Is that the nation you're picking?
Well, no, putting a point here. If you look between the distance between the two capitals of Lithuania and Belarus,
Mm-hmm.
they're very close to each other, as opposed to Warsaw and Minsk. So say Lithuania, with the help of NATO forces in Latvia, could basically attack Belarus, their capital, quite easily if they send their forces into Ukraine.
Okay, but the whole point of the move I'm talking about is to
Is to get the
not
Belarusians to stop. Yes, I
is
get it.
is to get the Belarusians to stop and to keep the Poles out of Ukraine so they don't get caught in crossfire trying to figure out who's friend and who's foe. If
Right.
you go straight into Belarus, that forces them on the defensive. That pulls them back out.
Yeah, but
That
you
takes them
have to
off the board. This is how you play checkers and chess, okay? You
right.
don't
But you have
muddy
to
up the
realize
pieces.
that
You knock
if
them
you
off
don't
the
cut
board.
the head of the snake off, they'll continue on.
That's the problem, though. You see, the
You
snake
got to.
is Russia.
Well, no, the snake in Belarus is Lukashenko.
Yeah, okay, but he is powerless if he has to stop and turn his entire army back around.
Yeah.
Think of the embarrassment that does to him. Think of what that does, that message that sends to Putin. Sorry, can't help you, bro. Now I have to defend my country because we thought the Poles hated you, but they're keeping us tied up just defending ourselves now.
Yeah.
See, the thing is I don't remember if you were here for the episode I did this in. There was an intercepted memo from Moscow that leaked a 7-year plan for Putin to take over Belarus administratively. He was going to stab Lukashenko in the back in the next 7 years. How do you think that makes him feel? Right? This dude is like, I've been your bro for this entire time, and you're going to stab me in the back and take my country over? Who the fuck are you, right? So it's hard enough that he has to defend his own country, but because he has now been taken out of off the board, that leaves Putin alone again. He doesn't have his
Well,
northern flank. Like, you can pick Lithuania or Estonia. I like your theory, but it's like I chose
it,
this
would- it,
this
it'd be
movement
Lithuania
very
or Latvia.
specifically for this effect
Well,
on Russia.
well, yes, but also with Sweden and Finland joining, or not? Is it
I
Finland
said
or is it
pick
Norway?
one nation though, Mike. You're picking
Well,
like
no,
a
no, no, no.
conglomeration of them.
I'm going into the whole
Well, give me
whole
your
thing with
one
NATO.
nation.
You know what? Lithuania.
Okay. And where do you want them to push into?
They would push straight for Minsk because they're not that. It's Vilnius, their capital, is not far from Minsk.
Okay. And I guess what you're saying is it's going to have the same effect.
Yes.
So I'm pushing in from the west into Belarus. You're pushing in from the northeast into Belarus, and the goal here is to take them out of the equation to keep Russia in this by themselves, so to
And if
speak.
Belarus fires on either the Lithuanians or the Polish,
Then that
that
Article 5.
Article 5 in Belarus is off the map.
But see, that's the thing. This is already like this is the what if of World War III. So we have to assume that NATO's going to be involved already. So the Article 5 thing, I get what you're saying, but it's like
Well,
this is
well,
already a thing.
if NATO's going to be involved already, then yes, I may choose, one NATO nation right there, but that doesn't mean the two other ones north of Lithuania aren't going to do anything.
Of course. But I mean, for this exercise, I was just pick one nation that wasn't Ukraine or Russia.
Right.
All right. Is Scott, are you there? Sleep. Jaime?
Yes.
Okay. Now you picked one earlier in the week, right?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to think about it, but I will
You've
pick
had
Germany.
2 weeks. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm gonna.
Everybody's pretty far from the front lines.
Okay, but it's okay. Germany has an air force. So, all right.
I
How
mean, okay, the only scenario that I see that if I were to wake up tomorrow,
mm,
Monday, and
mm,
see that something happened, it's probably they will be supporting either Poland
mhm.
or basically just supporting them, and either Poland or Slovakia if worst comes to worst.
This is
These are
assuming that Russia has already
This is assuming that Belarus and
attacked
it
them.
wants to engage with Ukraine and Poland or surrounding territory like Germany wants to support Poland. So they'll
Mm,
probably use it to, I guess it's Air Force or send some, aid by leopards.
mm-hmm.
So I guess mine's just a support role because it's too far. It's close but far enough to not do anything. I'm trying
Okay.
to say.
So Germany's involved. They're Where are they going to strike?
I think they would. No, let me pull up a
I got a
map
map
of.
on the screen.
Well, yeah, but I'm not looking at YouTube side.
Mm.
Hold on. Hold please.
I think it's really funny is none of us in our right mind ever even considered Moldova is going to become a force. It's like, no, Moldova can't even afford to be a
No, no,
force. I'm
no, never,
sorry.
never. Dude, don't
Moldova
even
can't
get me.
even afford China.
Don't even get me.
Moldova means well, but they can't. Right?
Okay, so they probably would support if I had to see that because Poland's next to close proximity to Kiev and Lviv. Kiev.
HBS is like Germany will just attack Poland again.
Hey, you're probably right about that in some weird fashion, but I mean, you know what?
In your
We can.
estimation, though, if you had to pick Germany, where do you like pick me a target? Where would they? I'm gonna assume because they're kind of far away on a land-based thing. Let's assume that their Luftwaffe is going to do something, right?
Huh?
Okay, so
It's
where
not
will
the
they?
Luftwaffe anymore.
The Bundeswaffe, whatever.
The Bundeswehr.
The
Lu-
Bundeswehr is the ground forces. Anyway,
Lutsk.
who would they attack in an effort to help? Who would they attack?
Belarus.
Everyone's attacking Belarus. God
Well, no,
damn it.
because listen, if they go attack Russia, they're too fucking far away to do anything. They can
Yes,
go to
agreed.
Poland.
Agreed.
I mean, what are they gonna do going to Ukraine? They got no support because Poland. I'm going
Well,
based. I'm going off. Listen, I'm going off of the base that you are
sure.
Poland.
Yeah.
You woke up the next day,
Hmm.
and Belarus is like, "Fuck you! I'm gonna go into Ukraine," and Poland's like, "No, I'm going to go get you." So the best, obviously, not murking the waters because who's gonna support Germany, or in this case, me, going into Ukraine? Poland is engaging Belarus. Who's gonna support Germany?
Okay. Look, I didn't think it was going to take this turn, but I'm actually kind of glad it did in a way because basically what we're all agreeing is Belarus is fucked. And
Yes,
and because Belarus is fucked, Russia
yes, it is.
loses a key foothold, I guess is a good way to say it, right? I don't think he ever assumed that Belarus was going to be militarily uh, very effective, but it was.
He
It's
believed
a
that Belarus was gonna engage militarily.
right,
Now,
but I
if
mean,
that's the easiest
he
step,
never expected Belarus to be like a what do I want to call it? A dominating force. He just thought, okay, well, it's like 20,000 guys less that of mine that die. It'll buy me a week or something, right? Something like
yeah,
that. But I think we've
yeah.
all agreed that Belarus is fucked because Lukashenko is a lapdog to Putin, and he's going to pay dearly with his own life eventually.
and
Well, the
and
question
Bundeswehr means
is,
armed
well,
forces. It doesn't
well, the
mean
question is, we need to kind of also think about it. That
Hmm.
if Belarus does engage in some form militarily inside Ukraine,
Right.
if we have to think, okay, Poland gets in, right? Poland ineffectively, even though it's the Belarusians' fault,
Sure.
has engaged. So we have to look at the fallout that would do to other NATO nations. Of like, even though it's all Belarus's fault, yes, but for Poland to be like, let's do this, that's still a, how can I put it, overreaching settlement.
Well, see, that's exactly why I picked my scenario very carefully because
No, well,
the
I know that's not.
idea
I'm trying to
was is
separate it.
to negate them, right?
Well, I understand that, but I'm just trying to separate it. Say, look, off of your situation, let's take it up a little bit more and say, okay, technically, you can go both ways. What I'm trying to say, in other words, to make
I'm
it very short.
I'm thinking we all sort of reach the same conclusion,
and then
and
the
that
But
Chechens
is
rebel
Belarus
again.
is fucked, dude.
well, no, I mean, I think the conclusion we have all reached is we're trying to take away an asset that Russia thought they had. And I think the way we decided to do that was not to attack Belarusian troops in Ukraine. We were going to attack Belarusian troops in Belarus to force the attacking force that they had to immediately go back home to be on the defensive to just take
Okay,
them
I
out of the war.
will say this though.
The
I will
thing that
say
I thought
this.
was really surprising is since you would have been the first to actually suggest air forces, I'm really surprised that you didn't strike Crimea because that is Russian held territory. And that
Well,
would
yes,
take a
but
big chunk
I
right out of the heart of Ukraine that
yeah,
they
but the thing
hold.
is, okay, look at the proximity of how far that is, and who's gonna help me. So I'm putting myself as Germany. Who's gonna help me in supporting me in Air Force if Russians try to engage? Now, regardless of the different um, equipment that Germany has and Russia has, Poland gonna be like, I got your mix, bro.
Well,
Ukraine can't support me.
no, but okay. So Germany would if you sent air forces to Crimea, you would have to deal with Russian S-400 anti-aircraft missiles. Those are pretty
Exactly, but
formidable.
that's what I'm trying to
However,
say. Is like that's why I thought of that. That's why I didn't mention it because I'm like,
Germany's surface or air to surface missiles are very good. Their tracking and their guidance is good. Their range is incredible. So that would be a really interesting stalemate, I think. I think S-400s might take a few Germans, but I think a German
but
flight could take out an S-400 battery also.
but the thing is that it comes back to it was Belarus entering Ukraine. What has obviously this is a Ukraine Russia conflict.
Right, but it doesn't
Belarus.
have to be just Belarus. See, I only brought in Belarus.
Oh, what I'm trying to say is that you just now you're bringing Germany into the fold of this war.
You did.
I know, but that I'm not. That's why I don't want to send it to Crimea.
Well, I mean, just, Crimea River, because it's got to go. Like, they're our enemy there, right? The really weird
Well,
thing is nobody picked China.
Because
I was.
we all know that China is going to do what China's going to do.
Well, I don't know if you saw the map on the YouTube side, but if you look at all of Russia and China, their connection onto the mainland and whatnot,
Yeah.
they have there's a big blob in the middle missing, and that's Mongolia and all the Himalayan countries because they're not a factor. They have no air force because you can't get air forces up that high altitude speaking, right? Everything up there is mountain troops. They're not going to waste their time up there. There's not enough resources and assets worth it. So, like, what would the Chinese do, right? I wasn't going to do this for a second nation, but let's look at the other front. So you have Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all under threat of Russia in the north, should they be able to afford forces to do that, to split their forces, or China in the west pushing over, right? So we know that Taiwan is within China's rocket artillery range, meaning that the Chinese could literally just rain artillery down on Taiwan day after day after day and just level the whole country into submission. They don't want to do that because they want the physical assets of Taiwan, the machinery and the technology or whatever, but it could easily turn into a if we can't have it, no one can. And then they wouldn't have to expend a single soldier because it's all within artillery range for them. So what does that front do to counter Chinese aggression? Do you just set up air to air screens? So like if the Chinese send up artillery, we just shoot them down like Patriot missile batteries do? Or, there's that question. None of us picked China, none of us picked any of the other nations, but that's a whole front that would have to be addressed eventually. Like, this would be another FDR in need, a man who has to deal with two fronts, right? Who's going to deal with it? Because you, me, and Mike all just took Belarus off the map, which, good, fine. Like, we focused on the ETO. Somebody has to focus on PTO because World War III, World War II, same fucking region of the world, just a couple of different players. And then the map I particularly chose, kind of interesting because it shows Russia attacking Saudi Arabia and like Qatar and the UAE and shit like that. Why? Oil? Or do they want to cripple the oil exporting industries of the Middle East so that their exports are the only game in town. And now they can price fix because everyone else's oil has been destroyed. The other interesting thing is part of the Russian mainland is up in Scandinavia, right? So like if you look at that, there's Finland, there's Sweden, and there's Norway, and then there's a big part of that west or east of all those three that's actually Russia. And what's really funny is Norway has some of the best oil fields and revenue of that region. And look how close Russia is to that same region.
Yes, but Finland's also worried about getting attacked.
Right, right. But I'm just saying, like, in terms of why would
Went to
Russia
war.
attack the Middle East? If they wipe out the Middle East's ability to export oil, and they have the same foothold in the North Sea that Norway does to get oil, then they really would be the only game in town in terms of price fixing for that half of the world. That would destroy smaller countries' economies because now all of a sudden they tripled their oil prices, their energy prices. There would be a new energy crisis on the Eastern Hemisphere.
Yep.
That's pretty serious shit. I mean, but that's why it's a world war. That's why I thought it was really fun to play this little game. Unfortunately, I didn't get Bjorn to get in here. I didn't get Rick to be in here because Ross was gonna tell us about the Baltic states, which would have been fun.
Oh, he may have gotten into the
Or the
shower with
Scandinavian
burrito.
states. No, he's been in the chat on and off. He's just non-committal to coming in and doing it here. And then Rick, lazy fucker, didn't show up because it's too late for me. I gotta get my beauty sleep or whatever the fucking excuse he's gonna come up with tomorrow, right? He was gonna talk about the British SAS. And I thought, dude, I want to hear that on air because I think that's a great idea. And he's not here to do it. So it's like, well, fuck
Well,
you.
the British SAS haven't been great since Sean Connery. was part
No,
of it.
but he was going to talk about England's involvement because they are a NATO ally. And it's just like, man, what would England do? Like, I don't want to drag this out for 4 hours, but I mean,
I gotta
what would
say this
England
though.
do? Would it be the English? Would it be the British Navy? Would it be the Air Force? Would it be the ground forces? Where would they go, and how would it affect them? How would it affect Russia, or how would it help Ukraine? Because you got to
I would say
remember,
this.
they cannot go into the Black Sea. Nobody can, because Turkey said, we're not opening that port. You're not allowed in. So in a way, they're a gatekeeper, which keeps Russians stuck in there, but nobody can go in there after them.
So I
So
would say,
it has to be the
um,
north.
I heard one of the generals, I think in the U.S., that said Britain is not even tier 1 or tier 2 military.
This doesn't matter. They're still going to be involved. They're still going to try to help in any capacity they can, even if it's just to send in troop ships full of nurses and doctors. You know what I'm saying? Like, they have a
Okay,
role
well,
to play.
I mean, if you say it like that, okay, I agree with you.
They have a role to play. Everyone's got a role to play. I mean, Portugal and Spain are part of this. What are they going to do, right? So that's why I
You
was
don't want
really hoping we'd have enough voices to come in here and go, okay, I'm going to pick this nation, and this
Well,
may be far-fetched, but this is what I think it could do, and this is the kind of effect it could have. Like,
to.
what if Poland simply just said, we're going to take back Kaliningrad because it was ours to begin with?
there's
Like,
nothing Russia can do. The force is already stretched thin enough.
exactly. It's like I could have went that easy route and just be like, well, Poland always wanted Kaliningrad back. They were just going to take that. Fuck it.
Mm-hmm.
They're
I
not
can
going
take
to
it
help
back. No,
anybody. They're only helping
Russia's
themselves.
Russians can't do shit about it because they're invested in Ukraine.
Yeah. That was my point. That's why this war game would have been fun.
But if Poland did that, then they'd be doing the same thing Russia did. with
Okay.
Crimea.
It's been 3 hours and 20 minutes.
So
What I think I would like to do, since the 4 of us are here, well, 2 of us in a chat napper is here, let's revisit this, and I will add a new criteria to it. So this was just day 1 and why we thought something was going to happen. Okay.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I obviously we all came together on Belarus because I think I told you on the first day what my plan was anyway, and everyone kind of just piggybacked off of it with a different nation. That's fine because I mean it's a small area of conflict. Obviously, we had to pick something, so that's fine. Um, maybe we can do this next week. I'm gonna keep an eye on the stories between today and next Friday. If it's a lot of stories, then we'll have to postpone it because I really didn't want this to be 3 hours in the first place. But let's just say tentatively, we will carry on next week, next war game scenario. Pick another nation. It's going to be. All right, so since we already picked Poland and you already picked Germany, well, since Poland was an obvious one, I'm taking Poland off the board on this next week. So it won't be Ukraine, it won't be Poland, and it won't be. Let's say Belarus is already knocked out. Okay? So we're going to go week 2 into World War III, and then what we think is the next thing. I'll flesh out the criteria, and I'll leave it in the War Never Changes show prep room, and then that'll give you guys a week to sort of come up with a plan. And nobody tell anybody your plan, so we don't all have the same sort of thing like we just did tonight. Because that way we can sort of spread this conflict out, because that's what a world war is.
Right, but let's be clear. There's no way Moldova is going to pull an army out of its ass.
No, because they can't afford it.
Okay, well, you know what? I'll take Latvia and we'll go from there.
Mike already took Latvia and Estonia.
Never mind.
No, I took Lithuania.
You took
Okay.
Lithuania. I take
Because it's
Latvia.
closer.
This is just low
Take
hanging.
Latvia.
You guys in low hanging fruit. Someone who's gonna pick Greece? You'll be like, hey, look, we're not the poors
You know what?
anymore.
Okay, you know what? I'll take Israel. I'll take Israel.
Oh, good choice. Okay.
I'll take fucking Israel.
Okay.
Fuck it.
Okay.
All right, I'll take Qatar.
In the War Never Changes, after I put the criteria, only list the nation you're gonna cover. Don't tell me the details. Just tell the nation,
right.
so that way everyone doesn't pick the same nation, because that'll make it fun. All right, so with that, we're going to do the Wargaming Week 2 at the end of the next week's show. I promise I'll try to get less stories to make this a smaller episode, but I'm going to play this because it'll be 3.5 hours. I want to thank everybody for watching, most of you guys who were in the chat for the entire show. That's awesome, stellar work, and thank you for putting up with all of us. I'm pretty wore out. I'm sure these guys are wore out. Scott was wore out an hour ago because he's been snoring ever since. This was the War Room. This was day 373. Don't quote me on that. If you are new to my channel, welcome. But if you're a regular here, welcome back. Either way, check out my other playlists and see if my other interests may be of interest to you. If you were following my playlist this week for Ixion in my Pwnery's Penny Arcade, I'm going to reward you. Tomorrow, there will be an epilogue episode of that game because it's just too damn good to put down. So anyway, thank you for watching. Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava.
And good night.
Shut up, infringed!